My mom is inviting you to dinner today. I read a message from my wife, for days after my wedding. At the end of the evening, my mother-in-law said something in Italian to my wife, and they both laughed. Before leaving, I smiled, took my mother-in-law by the hand, and said in perfect Italian, "For days." That's how long I'd been married before I received what I can only describe as the first official summons of my new life. Not a love note, not a sweet text asking how my day was going, but a message that made my stomach drop faster than a bad investment portfolio. My mom is inviting you to dinner tonight. She insists. I stared at my phone screen like it had just delivered news of an impending audit from the IRS. The word insists wasn't just casually dropped in there like a suggestion to maybe try that new Thai place downtown. No, this was the kind of insist that comes with invisible fine print, the kind that says failure to appear will result in eternal grudges and passive-aggressive holiday cards for the next 3 decades. This wasn't an invitation. This was a summons wrapped in a thin veil of familial politeness, an ambush disguised with silverware and cloth napkins. I sat there on our couch, still in my work clothes, tie loosened like a noose I'd temporarily escaped, and let out a sigh that could have powered a small wind turbine. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, and I typed out the only socially acceptable response a newly married man could give. Sure, can't wait. The lie tasted bitter even through text message. I added a smiley face emoji for good measure, because nothing says, "I'm genuinely excited about this," like a yellow circle with a forced grin. Then I did what any rational person would do when faced with imminent evaluation by their spouse's family. I walked to the bathroom mirror and started practicing my polite hostage smile. You know the one. It's that expression that says, "I'm thrilled to be here," while your eyes scream, "Please send help." I tried a few variations. The slight head tilt with raised eyebrows, the casual lean in with genuine-looking interest, the classic, "I'm listening intently to this story I've already heard twice" face. None of them looked convincing, but hey, fake it till you make it, right? I needed backup, or at least someone to tell me I was overreacting. So I called Leo, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been there through my awkward dating phase, my quarter-life crisis, and that unfortunate period where I thought growing a mustache would make me look distinguished. He picked up on the second ring, probably because he could sense distress through cellular waves. "What's up, man?" he answered. The sound of a video game paused in the background. "I've been summoned," I said dramatically. "Clara's mom wants me over for dinner tonight." The pause that followed was loaded with significance. Then Leo burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-blown, almost choking kind of laugh that told me everything I needed to know about my situation. "Bro," he finally managed between gasps, "that's not dinner. That's not even a casual family meal. That's orientation into the in-law empire. That's the empire striking back, man. You're about to get the full inspection, background check, credit score evaluation, 5-year plan interrogation, the works." "You're not helping," I muttered, though I knew he was probably right. Leo had been married for 2 years, which in married guy years made him basically a seasoned veteran, a wise sage who'd survived the trenches and lived to tell the tale. "Listen," he continued, his tone shifting to something resembling actual advice. "Just remember, everything you say tonight will be documented, analyzed, and potentially used against you at future family gatherings for the rest of your natural life. Don't mention anything about your college partying days. Don't bring up that time you accidentally set the kitchen on fire making quesadillas. And for the love of God, do not, I repeat, do not, criticize any of her cooking, even if it tastes like cardboard soaked in disappointment. Got it? Be perfect, be boring, be forgettable." Exactly. You're catching on. After hanging up with Leo, I looked at myself in the mirror again, this time with the grim determination of a soldier preparing for battle. I wasn't nervous. Okay, that's a lie. I was absolutely nervous, but I preferred to think of myself as strategically aware. See, here's the thing about a man's first dinner with his wife's family post-wedding. It's a performance that determines your social credit score for the foreseeable future. Nail it, and you're golden, invited to every birthday, holiday, and random Tuesday barbecue. Bomb it, and suddenly you'll develop a remarkable talent for forgetting about family gatherings, coming down with mysterious illnesses every Thanksgiving, and having urgent work emergencies whenever there's a family reunion. Clara came home about an hour before we needed to leave, looking annoyingly cheerful about the whole thing. She kissed me on the cheek and immediately went to the bedroom to change, humming some song I didn't recognize. Meanwhile, I stood there wondering if it was too late to fake a minor medical emergency. Nothing serious. Maybe just a sudden onset of food poisoning or a spontaneous allergy to in-laws. "You're going to love my mom once you get to know her," Clara called from the bedroom, as if reading my thoughts through walls. "I'm sure I will," I called back, which was technically not a lie because I phrased it as a future possibility rather than a current reality. I changed into what I hoped was an appropriate outfit. Nice jeans, not the ones with the hole near the pocket. A button-down shirt that said, "I'm responsible but not uptight," and shoes that I'd actually polished for once. I looked in the mirror one final time, straightened my collar, and gave myself a little pep talk that would have made any motivational speaker cringe. "You got this, Liam. You're a functional adult with a job, a car that runs most of the time, and a decent credit score. You can handle one dinner with your mother-in-law. People do this every day and survive." "Probably." Clara emerged from the bedroom looking effortlessly beautiful, which seemed unfair considering she wasn't the one about to be evaluated like a used car on a dealership lot. "Ready?" she asked, grabbing her purse. "As I'll ever be," I replied, which was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said all day. As we headed to the car, I realized that this dinner was inevitable, a rite of passage that every married person has to endure. This was my trial by fire, my initiation ceremony, my official welcome to the complex and sometimes terrifying world of extended family dynamics. I buckled my seatbelt and thought about Leo's words. Orientation into the in-law empire. Well, if tonight was orientation, I just hoped I'd pass the entrance exam. Clara's parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it had its own PR team and a strict dress code for visitors. You know the type. Manicured lawns so perfect they looked photoshopped, driveways that were cleaner than most people's kitchen floors, and an overall vibe that screamed, "Your Honda Civic doesn't belong here." As we pulled up to their house, I swear the entire street seemed to pause and judge us. Even the trees looked pretentious, standing there all tall and perfectly trimmed like they'd never had a bad hair day in their lives. The house itself was a monument to suburban success. 2 stories of "we're doing better than you" energy, complete with those fancy shutters that serve absolutely no functional purpose except to tell visitors that yes, these people have disposable income. The front porch had those decorative pillars that made the entrance look like a miniature version of a Greek temple, because apparently that's what says, "Welcome to our humble abode" these days. There was even a little fountain in the front yard, trickling water in that annoyingly peaceful way that made me instantly need to pee. I parked my car, which suddenly looked very aware of its Kia status, and took a deep breath that was probably 50% oxygen and 50% pure anxiety. Clara reached over and squeezed my hand, giving me one of those encouraging smiles that wives give their husbands right before they throw them into the deep end of the family pool. "They're going to love you," she whispered, which is exactly what people say when they're not entirely convinced of the statement themselves. "Sure they will," I replied, unbuckling my seatbelt with the enthusiasm of someone heading to a root canal. As we walked up the pristine stone pathway, seriously, not a single pebble out of place, I noticed that even the doorbell looked expensive. It was one of those fancy video doorbell things that probably had better security clearance than most government buildings. Before I could even reach for it, the door swung open, and there stood Clara's father, Marco. Now, Marco Romano was the kind of guy who'd clearly mastered the art of strategic neutrality. He had that diplomatic smile down to a science, warm enough to seem welcoming, but measured enough to maintain plausible deniability if things went south. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "I'm casual, but I still iron my clothes," and his handshake was firm without being aggressive, friendly without being overeager. This was a man who'd spent years perfecting the delicate balance of being married to a strong-willed woman, and his entire demeanor suggested he'd learned when to speak up and, more importantly, when to strategically retreat to the garage. "Liam, good to see you again," he said, his voice carrying that careful enthusiasm of someone who'd been thoroughly briefed on proper greeting protocols. Come in, come in. How was the drive?" "Not bad," I replied, stepping into a foyer that looked like it had been staged for a home design magazine. "Traffic was pretty light." That's good, Marco nodded. already running out of small talk ammunition. I could see it in his eyes, the silent plea of one man to another that said, "I'm on your side, but I live here, so my hands are tied." Then, like a perfectly timed theatrical entrance, she appeared. Luciana Romano, my brand new mother-in-law, emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen, and let me tell you, this woman had presence. She didn't just walk into a room. She claimed it, conquered it, and immediately established the rules of engagement. Every single hair on her head was in its designated position, probably held there by a combination of expensive hair products and sheer force of will. She wore pearls, actual pearls, like they were casual, everyday accessories, and they sat around her neck like a choker of authority, a tangible reminder that this was her kingdom and we were all just visiting. Her outfit was what I'd call intimidatingly put together. A silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, slacks with a crease so sharp they could slice bread, and shoes that clicked on the hardwood floor with the precision of a metronome keeping time to the rhythm of judgment. "Liam, darling," she said, and I immediately noticed that her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a corporate boardroom right before someone announces layoffs. She approached me with her arms slightly extended, and I braced myself for what turned out to be the most performative hug I'd ever experienced, complete with air kisses on both cheeks that came nowhere near actual contact with my face. Then she stepped back, and I felt her eyes scanning me from head to toe like one of those airport security scanners, except this one was checking for signs of inadequacy, poor life choices, and insufficient income brackets. Her gaze lingered on my shirt, a perfectly acceptable button-down that I'd literally bought last week, and I swear I could see her mentally cataloging everything wrong with it. "You look comfortable," she finally said, and the way she said comfortable made it sound like a diagnosis rather than a compliment. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation, like she'd just caught me showing up to a black tie event in sweatpants. Now, I had two choices here. I could get defensive, or I could play it smooth. I chose smooth, channeling every ounce of confidence I could muster while internally screaming, "Thank you," I said with my best diplomatic smile, the one I'd been practicing in the mirror. Comfort is underrated these days, don't you think? Everyone's so stressed out all the time, walking around in clothes that require special breathing techniques. I figure life's too short to be uncomfortable in your own shirt. Clara coughed slightly beside me, probably trying to cover a laugh or possibly a groan. It was hard to tell. Marco's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement, though he quickly disguised it by suddenly becoming very interested in closing the front door. Luciana's expression didn't change, but I noticed the slightest tightening around her eyes, like she was recalculating her initial assessment. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like she was buying time to load her next verbal ammunition, "I suppose that's one way to look at it. Shall we move to the living room? Dinner won't be ready for another few minutes, and I thought we could chat." Chat was definitely code for interrogation, but I nodded pleasantly and followed her into a living room that looked like it had never experienced the joy of someone actually living in it. Everything was pristine, coordinated, and strategically placed. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged with geometric precision. The coffee table books were stacked in order of size. Even the damn magazines were fanned out at perfect angles. This wasn't a living room. This was a showroom, a carefully curated display of domestic superiority. I sat down on the couch, which was somehow both expensive feeling and deeply uncomfortable, probably by design. Clara sat next to me, close enough that our legs touched, and I was grateful for the moral support. Marco settled into an armchair with the relieved posture of someone who'd successfully navigated the opening ceremonies and could now fade into the background. Luciana perched on the edge of the opposite couch, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, looking every bit like a queen preparing to hold court. The battle lines had been drawn. The arena had been established. I was officially in the lion's den, and the lion was wearing pearls and judging my shirt. This was going to be a long evening. When Luciana finally announced that dinner was ready, I felt like a defendant being called to the stand. We all filed into the dining room, which was somehow even more intimidating than the living room, if that was possible. The table looked like it had been professionally styled for a magazine shoot, the kind of setup that makes you wonder if you're actually supposed to eat the food or just admire it from a safe distance. The tablecloth was crisp white linen, probably imported from some European country where they take their table linens very seriously. The plates weren't just plates. They were fine china with delicate gold trim that screamed, "If you chip me, you'll be paying off the debt until your grandchildren graduate college." The silverware gleamed under the chandelier light like it had been individually polished by trained professionals, each fork and knife positioned at exactly the right angle according to some ancient dining etiquette manual that normal people have never heard of. Even the napkins were folded into these elaborate shapes that looked like origami swans, and I was genuinely afraid to unfold mine because it seemed like destroying art. There were wine glasses, multiple wine glasses per person, actually, because apparently one glass isn't enough when you're trying to impress people. There were little plates for bread, separate plates for salad, and what I can only assume were specialty plates for foods I didn't even know existed. The whole setup had this unspoken message written all over it. We have standards here, and your IKEA dining set doesn't meet them. I sat down carefully, hyper-aware of every movement I made, like I was defusing a bomb made of social expectations and breakable dishware. Clara sat beside me, looking completely comfortable in this environment, which made sense since she'd grown up with this level of dinner theater. Marco took his seat at the head of the table with the weary acceptance of someone who'd sat through thousands of these performances. And Luciana, naturally, positioned herself where she could maintain maximum eye contact with me throughout the meal. The food started arriving, course after course of elaborately prepared dishes that looked almost too beautiful to eat. There was some kind of antipasto spread with olives, cheeses, and cured meats arranged in patterns that suggested someone had taken a food styling class. Then came a salad with ingredients I couldn't even name, drizzled with what was probably some artisanal balsamic vinegar that cost more per ounce than gold. The main course was lasagna, but not just any lasagna. This was the kind of lasagna that had probably taken 8 hours to prepare and came with its own backstory about authentic family recipes passed down through generations. I'll admit, everything tasted incredible. But here's the thing about eating amazing food while being interrogated. It loses some of its appeal when you're trying to chew, swallow, and formulate acceptable answers to invasive questions all at the same time. And oh boy, did Luciana have questions. She didn't waste any time, diving straight into what I can only describe as a full-scale background check disguised as polite dinner conversation. This wasn't small talk. This was reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, a systematic evaluation of my entire existence up to this point. So, Liam, she began, dabbing at her mouth with her swan napkin. Tell me about where you grew up. What kind of neighborhood was it? I swallowed my bite of lasagna, buying myself a few seconds. I grew up in the suburbs, pretty standard middle-class neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, kids playing in the yards, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy, but it was a good place to be a kid. She nodded, but her expression suggested she was filing this information away in some mental database marked socioeconomic background. Adequate, but unimpressive. And your parents? What do they do? My dad's a high school teacher, history and social studies. My mom worked as a nurse until she retired a few years ago. How lovely, Luciana said in a tone that suggested it was anything but lovely. Public service professions. Very noble. I couldn't tell if that was genuine respect or thinly veiled disappointment that my parents weren't surgeons or lawyers, but I smiled and nodded like I'd just received a compliment. Then came the career questions, which I'd been dreading since I walked through the door. Clara mentioned you work in marketing. Luciana continued, taking a sip of wine that somehow looked judgmental. How's the job market in that field? Stable, I hope. Translation. Do you make enough money to support my daughter? Or am I going to have to stage an intervention in 6 months? It's pretty stable, actually. I replied, trying to sound confident without sounding defensive. I've been with my company for 4 years now, got promoted last year to senior account manager. The industry's always evolving, which keeps things interesting, but there's steady demand for what we do. And the pay is sufficient? She actually asked that, out loud, at the dinner table, with a straight face. Marco cleared his throat uncomfortably, and Clara shot her mother a look that could have melted steel, but Luciana just blinked innocently like she'd asked about the weather. We're doing fine, I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant, even though internally I was calculating exactly how many olives I'd need to shove in my mouth to choke myself out of this conversation. Maybe 12. Definitely 12. But Luciana wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. The questions kept coming, each one more invasive than the last, like she was working from a checklist titled, "Everything you need to know about your son-in-law to decide if he's worthy." Do you have any student loans remaining? What are your thoughts on homeownership versus renting? Have you started thinking about retirement savings? You can never start too early, you know. Do you plan to pursue any additional education or certifications? With each question, I took another bite of food, using chewing as a socially acceptable stalling tactic. The lasagna was getting less delicious with every invasive inquiry, and I was starting to understand why people developed stress-eating habits. At this rate, I was going to finish the entire pan of lasagna just to avoid having to form coherent sentences. Marco, bless his heart, tried periodically to redirect the conversation into safer territory. During a brief pause in Luciana's questioning, probably while she was mentally reviewing her notes for the next round, he jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone throwing a life preserver to a drowning man. "Do you like football, Liam?" he asked, his eyes practically begging me to give him something, anything, to talk about that wasn't related to my financial portfolio or life plans. I seized the opportunity like it was the last helicopter out of a war zone. "Absolutely. I'm a Packers fan, actually. Have been since I was a kid." Marco's face lit up. "No kidding. I'm more of a Giants fan myself, but I respect the Packers. Great organization, rich history. Yeah, though my fandom mostly just means I lose money on bad bets every season," I added with a laugh, hoping humor would lighten the mood. Marco actually laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed through the dining room. For a brief, beautiful moment, it felt like we were just two guys bonding over sports and the universal experience of making terrible gambling decisions. Luciana, however, did not laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. She just sat there, fork hovering over her plate, looking at both of us like we'd started speaking an alien language. Her expression suggested she was deeply disappointed that we derailed her carefully orchestrated interrogation with something as frivolous as football talk. The moment passed quickly, and the atmosphere returned to its previous state of polite tension. Even the lasagna on my plate seemed to sense the mood shift, sitting there all sad and judged. I looked around the table, taking in the scene. Marco trying to look supportive while clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Clara attempting to mediate with her presence alone. Luciana maintaining her position as chief inquisitor, and me, just trying to survive this meal without saying anything that would get me permanently banned from future family gatherings. Even the food seemed tense, I swear. The lasagna looked uncomfortable, the salad appeared anxious, and the wine in my glass was probably developing stress-related acidity issues. This wasn't dinner. This was a performance evaluation with really good Italian food. We'd somehow made it to dessert, which felt like a small miracle considering I'd survived the appetizer interrogation, the main course investigation, and what I can only describe as the salad course psychological evaluation. Luciana had brought out what she proudly announced was her homemade tiramisu, and I'll give her credit, it looked absolutely incredible. Layers of coffee-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone cream dusted with cocoa powder, served in individual glass dishes that probably cost more than my monthly Netflix subscription. I was just starting to relax, thinking maybe I'd made it through the worst of it, when Clara's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted into that particular look that says, "Work emergency," or possibly, "My friend is having a crisis and needs immediate attention." "I'm so sorry, I need to take this," Clara said, already pushing her chair back. "It's Sarah. She's been having issues with her wedding planner, and she's kind of freaking out." "Of course, honey. Go ahead," Luciana said, suddenly all sweetness and understanding, which should have been my first warning sign that something was about to go sideways. Clara stepped out of the dining room, her voice already shifting into that soothing, "I'm going to help you solve this problem," tone as she headed toward the front hallway. And just like that, I was alone at the table with Marco and Luciana, feeling suddenly very exposed, like a gazelle that had just been separated from the herd. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and loaded, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I focused on my tiramisu, taking a careful bite and making all the appropriate appreciative sounds because the last thing I needed was to offend Luciana's baking skills on top of everything else. Then Luciana leaned toward her husband, just slightly, and said something in Italian. Her voice was low, casual, like she was making an offhand comment about the weather or the temperature in the room. But there was something about her tone, a little edge of amusement, a hint of smugness, that made my internal alarm system start blaring. Marco chuckled in response, a quick, uncomfortable laugh that men make when their wives say something they know they shouldn't agree with, but also know better than to contradict. He shot me a glance, one of those don't mind her looks that attempted to communicate sympathy across the table while also maintaining plausible deniability. Now, here's where things get interesting. Luciana clearly assumed that I, like most Americans she'd probably encountered, had absolutely no idea what she'd just said. She probably thought Italian was her secret code language, a safe space where she could say whatever she wanted without consequence, like having a private conversation right in front of someone who couldn't understand. It's the kind of move people pull when they assume linguistic superiority, when they think they've got a built-in privacy shield. What Luciana didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known unless Clara had mentioned it, which she apparently hadn't, was that I speak Italian. Not just, I took a semester in college and can order pasta Italian, but actually fluent, conversational, read Italian literature in the original language Italian. My grandmother, Nonna Maria, was from Naples. She came to the United States when she was 23, married my grandfather, and proceeded to raise her kids in a household where Italian wasn't just spoken, it was the primary language. My dad grew up bilingual, and he made sure I did too. Some of my best childhood memories are sitting in Nana's kitchen while she cooked, teaching me Italian phrases and idioms, correcting my pronunciation, and telling me stories about growing up in Italy. She'd quiz me on verb conjugations while stirring sauce, make me read Italian newspapers at the breakfast table, and refuse to answer me if I spoke to her in English. In questa casa, parliamo italiano, she'd say. In this house, we speak Italian. So when Luciana leaned over and whispered to Marco, "E educato ora," aspetta finch cheese saldi, I understood every single word. Every single word. He's polite now. Wait till he asks for money. I nearly choked on my tiramisu. Actually choked, like coffee-soaked ladyfingers going down the wrong pipe. Mascarpone cream threatening to exit through my nose. The whole embarrassing production. I grabbed my water glass and took a long drink, partly because I needed to clear my airway and partly because I needed a moment to process what I'd just heard. She thought I was a gold digger. This woman, who'd spent the entire evening evaluating my career prospects, my financial stability, and my long-term earning potential, genuinely believed that I was some kind of opportunistic con artist who'd married her daughter for access to the family bank account. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. Here I was, working a full-time job, paying my own bills, never once asking anyone for a dime, and she'd already written me off as a future mooch. I could feel my face getting hot, not from embarrassment, but from pure, unfiltered indignation mixed with a healthy dose of, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me right now." I set down my fork carefully, very carefully, because if I held onto it, I might accidentally launch it across the room, and that would definitely not help my case. Marco must have noticed my reaction because his expression shifted from amused to slightly concerned, like he was suddenly worried he'd laughed at the wrong thing. But Luciana just continued eating her tiramisu, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just detonated a linguistic bomb right in front of someone who understood the explosion. I sat there for a moment, weighing my options. I could let it slide, pretend I didn't understand, swallow my pride along with the dessert, and just move on. That would be the mature thing to do, the diplomatic approach, the path of least resistance. I could be the bigger person, rise above it, let it go. Or, and hear me out here, I could absolutely not do any of those things. See, here's what Luciana didn't understand about people who grow up bilingual. We don't just learn the language, we learn the culture, the nuances, the context. We understand not just what words mean, but what they mean when they're said in that particular tone, with that particular inflection. And we definitely understand when we're being insulted in what someone assumes is a secret language. My nana didn't raise me to sit quietly while someone talked trash about me in Italian right to my face. She raised me to be proud of my heritage, to value the gift of being bilingual, and to never, ever, let someone assume they could use language as a weapon without consequences. I smiled sweetly, taking another small bite of tiramisu, letting the moment stretch out just a little bit longer. Inside my head, I was already planning my response, crafting exactly what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. This wasn't going to be some aggressive confrontation or a dramatic scene. No, this needed to be handled with precision, with style, with just the right amount of surprise. I understood everything you just said, and now you're going to regret it. Luciana caught my eye and smiled at me. One of those patronizing smiles that said, "You poor, oblivious American boy who has no idea what I just said about you." She probably thought she was being so clever, so subtle. She probably felt quite pleased with herself for getting away with her little commentary. Oh, Luciana. Sweet, unsuspecting, about to have her entire evening turned upside down Luciana. I was about to serve her a slice of humble pie to go with that tiramisu, and unlike her dessert, mine was going to be delivered in her native language. The setup was perfect. Clara was still on the phone in the other room, giving me the space to handle this my way. Marco was watching nervously, probably sensing that something was about to happen, but not quite sure what. And Luciana was sitting there, completely confident in her assumed linguistic superiority, with absolutely no idea that the polite, accommodating son-in-law she'd been judging all evening was about to flip the entire script. I set down my spoon, dabbed my mouth with my napkin. The swan had been destroyed anyway, no point in trying to preserve it now, and prepared to introduce Luciana to a side of me she hadn't anticipated meeting. This was going to be good. This was going to be very, very good. I heard Clara's voice trailing off in the hallway, the telltale sign that her phone call was wrapping up. Perfect timing. I wanted her to witness this, not because I needed backup, but because honestly, this moment deserved an audience. What I was about to do was either going to be the most brilliant move of my married life or the thing that would get me permanently uninvited from every future family gathering. Possibly both. Clara walked back into the dining room, sliding her phone into her pocket and looking slightly apologetic. Sorry about that, everyone. Sarah's wedding planner double-booked her venue, and she was having a complete meltdown. I think I talked her off the ledge, though. No problem at all, dear, Luciana said with that practiced maternal warmth that she seemed to reserve exclusively for her daughter. We were just finishing up dessert. Yeah, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. And actually, before we move on, there's something I wanted to say. The room got quiet. Marco's eyes widened slightly, like he could sense incoming turbulence, but couldn't quite identify the source. Clara looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and mild concern, the expression of someone who knows their spouse well enough to recognize when they're about to do something unpredictable. I walked around the table slowly, casually, like I was just stretching my legs after a long meal. But really, I was positioning myself, setting the stage, building the dramatic tension like some kind of dinner theater production. When I reached Luciana's side of the table, I gently, and I mean very gently, with the utmost respect, took her hand. She looked up at me, surprised but not alarmed, probably thinking I was about to thank her for the meal or compliment her cooking. Her expression was expectant, almost pleased, like she thought I was finally going to perform the appropriate level of gratitude and deference she'd been waiting for all evening. Signora Luciana, I began, my voice calm and measured, switching to formal Italian address with perfect pronunciation. The word signora hung in the air for just a moment, and I watched her expression shift from pleased to confused. Why was I calling her signora? Why did my pronunciation sound so clean, so natural? Before we continue, I continued in English, maintaining eye contact. Would you mind writing down which country you're from and how old you are? Her face went from confused to completely frozen, like someone had just pressed pause on a video. Her hand, which had been relaxed in mine, suddenly tensed up. Scusi, she said, the Italian word slipping out automatically, which was interesting because it meant her brain was already starting to panic. And that's when I delivered the knockout punch. So I know how long it's been since sarcasm became your family language, I said, in absolutely flawless Italian. Not textbook Italian, not tourist Italian, but natural, colloquial, Neapolitan-influenced Italian with the kind of rhythm and intonation that only comes from actually speaking it as a living language. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Marco's spoon, which he'd been holding halfway to his mouth, dropped onto his plate with a clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent dining room like a gunshot. Clara's jaw literally fell open, And I mean literally in the actual literal sense, not the exaggerated way people usually mean it. Her mouth formed a perfect O of shock. But Luciana's reaction was the real masterpiece. All the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug and her blood had decided to evacuate the premises. Her eyes went wide, wider than I thought physically possible, and she blinked rapidly like maybe if she blinked enough times she could reboot reality and make the last 30 seconds unhappen. Somewhere in the house, I swear I heard the family cat meow nervously, as if even the pets could sense the seismic shift in the household power dynamics. I gave Luciana's hand a gentle, respectful squeeze and then released it, stepping back and returning to my seat with the casual confidence of someone who'd just played their ace card and knew exactly how good it was. I picked up my fork and took another bite of tiramisu, maintaining perfect composure, like I'd just made a comment about the weather rather than completely demolishing the evening's entire social structure. Lovely dinner, by the way, I added, still in Italian, my tone conversational and pleasant. The judgment was a bit undercooked, but we'll work on it. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the kind of profound, absolute absence of sound that you usually only experience in deep space or those sensory deprivation tanks. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I'm pretty sure time itself stopped for a moment, just to appreciate the magnitude of what had just happened. You could have heard a pin drop. Hell, you could have heard a feather floating gently through the air. You could have heard someone thinking about dropping a pin 3 houses down. The pasta in the kitchen was probably regretting its existence, wishing it had been turned into something less controversial, like plain spaghetti instead of being associated with this particular family dinner. Clara was the first to find her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. You speak Italian? She said it in English, probably because her brain was too overwhelmed to attempt any other language at the moment. Only when provoked by pasta politics. I replied smoothly, switching back to English and giving her a small smile. Marco had set down his spoon and was now just staring at me with something that looked like a mixture of horror, respect, and possibly admiration. His expression seemed to say, I cannot believe you just did that, and that was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed simultaneously. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again, apparently deciding that no words could adequately address what had just transpired. Luciana, meanwhile, had still not recovered. She sat there, statue still, her hand suspended in midair where I'd released it, like her body's operating system had crashed and was struggling to reboot. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish that had just been unexpectedly pulled out of water and was trying to figure out how breathing worked. I took another bite of tiramisu, chewing thoughtfully. The coffee flavor is really well balanced, I commented, still in Italian, because at this point, why stop? Did you use espresso or just strong regular coffee? That seemed to snap Luciana partially back to consciousness. She blinked several times in rapid succession, and some color started returning to her face, though it was mostly red now, creeping up from her neck like a thermometer measuring rising embarrassment. You understood, she stammered, also in Italian now, because apparently we'd all committed to this linguistic direction. When I said that I'm polite now, but you should wait until I ask for money, I finished for her, my tone still pleasant and conversational, like we were discussing a recipe rather than her earlier character assassination. Yes, I understood that perfectly. My grandmother would be so proud that her years of Italian lessons are still paying off. She always said, Liam, you never know when being bilingual will come in handy. Turns out, Nana was right. Clara made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. Marco had picked up his wine glass and was taking a very long, very deliberate drink, clearly using it as an excuse to not have to participate in this conversation. I didn't mean, Luciana started, but her voice faltered. How exactly do you walk back an insult that you thought was secret but turned out to be perfectly understood? Oh, I think you meant exactly what you said, I replied, still keeping my tone light and friendly, which somehow made it more devastating. And that's fine. You don't know me yet, so I understand the skepticism. But here's the thing, Signora Luciana. I work 45 hours a week at a job I'm good at. I pay my own bills. I've never asked anyone for money since I graduated college, and I married your daughter because I love her, not because I'm auditioning for the role of family financial burden. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Without the secret commentary. In any language. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less shocked, more contemplative. Clara was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between, "I can't believe you just did that," and "that was kind of incredible." Marco had set down his wine glass and was nodding slightly, like I'd just articulated something he'd been thinking for 20 years but never had the courage to say. And Luciana? Well, Luciana looked like she'd just been checkmated in a game she didn't realize she was playing. Her carefully constructed evening of subtle evaluation and coded commentary had completely collapsed, and now she was sitting in the rubble, trying to figure out how to rebuild. The really beautiful part? I hadn't been rude. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted her back. I'd simply revealed that her secret weapon wasn't secret at all, and that maybe, just maybe, she should have asked a few more questions before making assumptions. Checkmate, Signora. Checkmate. The car ride home was absolutely legendary in its awkwardness. I'm talking Hall of Fame level uncomfortable silence, the kind that gets its own exhibit in the Museum of Marital Tension. Clara and I had said our goodbyes to her parents, which was about as comfortable as hugging a cactus, and walked to the car in complete silence. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat, the distant sound of crickets judging you, and possibly the universe itself holding its breath to see what happens next. I unlocked the car, we both got in, buckled our seatbelts with synchronized precision like we were astronauts preparing for a space mission, and I started the engine. The radio came on automatically, some pop song about love and summer nights, and Clara immediately turned it off. That's how you know things are serious. When someone voluntarily chooses silence over background music, you're in uncharted territory. We pulled out of her parents' driveway, and I could feel Clara's eyes on me. Not angry eyes exactly, but definitely processing eyes. The kind of look that says, I have thoughts, many thoughts, and I'm organizing them into coherent arguments as we speak. We made it approximately 3 blocks before she broke. You speak Italian? She said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite identify. You speak Italian? Since when? How? Why didn't you tell me? I kept my eyes on the road, mostly because I was trying not to smile too obviously. Since I was a kid. My nana? My dad's mom. She's from Naples. She basically raised me bilingual, made me speak Italian at home, taught me all the verbs, the whole deal. And you never thought to mention this? Clara's voice went up about half an octave. We've been together for 2 years, Liam. 2 years. We've had countless conversations. We got married. At what point were you planning to drop the, oh, by the way, I'm fluent in Italian bomb? I shrugged, finally allowing myself a small grin. It never really came up? I mean, it's not like I was actively hiding it. You never asked if I spoke any other languages. We don't exactly hang out in Italian restaurants where I'd have reason to bust it out. Clara stopped herself, clearly torn between multiple emotions. That's not the point, Liam. Okay, so what is the point? She was quiet for a moment, and I glanced over to see her staring out the window, her reflection visible in the glass. You embarrassed her, she finally said, but her voice was softer now, less accusatory. I translated her own script. I countered, switching lanes to avoid a slow-moving truck. She embarrassed herself. I just happened to understand it when she did. Clara made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been exasperation. Honestly, probably both. You basically called her out in front of everyone, in her own language, that she thought was her secret code. She called me a gold digger. I pointed out, keeping my tone reasonable, in what she thought was her secret code, while I was sitting right there eating her tiramisu, which was excellent, by the way, but that's beside the point. I know, Clara sighed, and I could hear the conflict in her voice. She was caught between defending her mother and acknowledging that, yeah, what Luciana had said was pretty messed up. She shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. Extremely wrong, I agreed. I work my ass off. I pay my bills. I've never asked anyone for money. And I married you because I'm completely crazy about you, not because I'm trying to get access to the family fortune. Which, no offense to your parents, I wasn't even aware existed until I saw that house. Clara turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I could see her fighting a smile. That was kind of badass though, she admitted quietly. What was? The whole thing. The way you handled it. The how long has sarcasm been your family language line. The comment about the judgment being undercooked. She paused. The fact that you did it all while being perfectly polite and respectful. Now I did smile, full-on grin. I learned from the best. Nana didn't raise me to be rude. She raised me to be strategic. Strategic, Clara repeated, and this time she definitely laughed. That's one word for it. We drove in silence for a few more minutes, but this time it was different, less tense, more thoughtful. I could practically hear the gears turning in Clara's head, processing everything that had happened, recalibrating her understanding of both me and her mother. You know she's going to call me tomorrow, Clara said eventually. Probably first thing in the morning. Maybe even tonight when we get home. Oh, absolutely, I agreed. I'd be shocked if your phone doesn't ring before we pull into our driveway. She's going to be upset. She's going to be embarrassed, I corrected. There's a difference. Upset is what you are when someone wrongs you. Embarrassed is what you are when you get caught doing something you shouldn't have been doing. Clara was quiet again, and then she said something that surprised me. You know what? Good. Maybe she needed to be embarrassed. Maybe she needed someone to finally call her out on her stuff. I glanced over at her, eyebrows raised. Really, don't get me wrong. I love my mom, Clara said quickly, but she can be a lot. She's always been this way, judging people, making assumptions, thinking she knows best about everything. And my dad and I just kind of let her do it, because it's easier than confronting her. Well, consider her confronted, I said dryly. Clara laughed again, and this time it was genuine, unreserved. Oh my God, her face. Did you see her face when you started speaking Italian? I thought she was going to pass out right there at the table. Marco dropped his spoon, I added. It was like a cartoon. I half expected it to bounce. And when you said the judgment was undercooked, Clara was really laughing now, the kind of laughter that's almost crying, the kind that releases tension that's been building for hours. I wanted to die. I wanted to sink through the floor. But also, I kind of wanted to applaud. We pulled up to a red light, and I looked over at her. She was wiping tears from her eyes, still giggling, her whole body shaking with laughter. And suddenly, I wasn't worried anymore. Whatever happened next with Luciana, whatever phone calls came, whatever family dynamics needed to be navigated, we were okay. Clara and I were on the same team. The light turned green, and I accelerated through the intersection. Clara's phone buzzed in her purse. $20 says that's your mom, I said. She pulled out her phone, looked at the screen, and started laughing again. You win. It's her. Are you going to answer? Clara looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. You know what? No, not right now. She can wait until tomorrow. Let her think about what she said for a little while. That's cold, I said, impressed. I learned from the best, she replied, echoing my earlier words. You're not the only one who can be strategic. We pulled into our apartment complex parking lot, and Clara was still staring at her phone, which was now buzzing with a second call. She's persistent, I'll give her that. Luciana Romano doesn't strike me as someone who gives up easily, I observed, parking the car and turning off the engine. She's not, Clara confirmed, declining the call and putting her phone on silent. But neither are you, apparently. We sat in the car for a moment, neither of us making a move to get out. The parking lot lights cast weird shadows across Clara's face, and I could see her processing everything, working through the implications of what had happened. Are we going to be okay? I asked quietly. With your parents, I mean. Did I just permanently screw up my relationship with your mom? Clara considered this seriously. Honestly, I think you might have just started an actual relationship with my mom. The real kind, not the fake polite kind where everyone pretends everything is fine. She respects people who stand up to her. She won't admit it, probably ever, but she does. So you're saying I didn't completely destroy everything? Oh, you definitely destroyed something, Clara grinned. You destroyed her assumption that she could get away with talking about you in Italian. You destroyed her illusion of control. You destroyed the entire power dynamic she'd set up. But that might be exactly what needed to happen. We finally got out of the car and headed up to our apartment. As we climbed the stairs, Clara slipped her hand into mine. For the record, she said as I unlocked our door, watching you politely demolish my mother in 2 languages? That was kind of hot. I laughed, pushing the door open. Ladies and gentlemen, sarcasm, saving marriages since forever, and destroying mother-in-law relationships? Clara added. Nah, I said, pulling her inside and closing the door behind us, just translating them accurately. That night, while Clara was in the bathroom brushing her teeth, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. I glanced at it. 3 missed calls and 2 text messages from Luciana. Clara came out, saw me looking at the phone, and shrugged. "She'll survive until tomorrow," Clara said, climbing into bed. "We all will." She looked at me in the mirror while she pulled her hair back, and her expression was soft, almost proud. "You know what the crazy thing is?" "What?" "That was kind of hot." I grinned. "You already said that." "It bears repeating," she said, turning off the light and settling in beside me. "My husband, the secret Italian speaker. The linguistic ninja. The—" Okay. I laughed, pulling her close. "Let's not get carried away." But as we lay there in the dark, I couldn't help feeling pretty good about how the evening had turned out. Sure, I'd made things complicated. Sure, there would be phone calls and conversations, and probably some awkwardness ahead. But I'd also drawn a line, established boundaries, and most importantly, I'd made it clear that I wasn't going to be anyone's punching bag, even in Italian. Translation accomplished. Message received. Game on. The next morning came way too early, announced by the aggressive buzzing of Clara's phone on her nightstand. I'm talking the kind of persistent, relentless buzzing that says, "I'm not going away until you acknowledge my existence." I cracked one eye open and squinted at the clock, 7:23 a.m. On a Saturday. Nobody calls at 7:23 a.m. on a Saturday unless someone died, the house is on fire, or your mother-in-law spent the entire night stewing over being linguistically outsmarted at her own dinner table. Clara groaned and rolled over, reaching for her phone with one hand while using the other to cover her eyes from the morning sunlight streaming through our bedroom window. I propped myself up on one elbow, suddenly very awake and very interested in how this conversation was about to go down. "Hi, Mom," Clara answered, her voice still scratchy with sleep but bracing for impact. And then, oh man, then I heard it. Even from my side of the bed, even without the phone on speaker, I could hear Luciana's voice coming through that speaker like an opera singer hitting the high notes. The woman had volume, I'll give her that. She had projection. She had passion. She had approximately 17 hours of pent-up indignation that was now flowing out in a torrent of Italian-accented English that somehow made every word sound both dramatic and accusatory. "Your husband mocked me. In Italian. At my own dinner table. In front of your father. He made me look like a fool." Clara sat up fully now, running her free hand through her bedhead hair, and I watched her face cycle through several emotions: sympathy, annoyance, amusement, and finally, something that looked like resolution. She took a deep breath, and I could literally see her spine straightening, her shoulders squaring. This was it. This was the moment where Clara was either going to defend her mother's honor or draw a line in the sand. "Mom," Clara said, her voice firm but not unkind. "Maybe don't insult people assuming they don't understand." Silence. Beautiful, glorious, stunned silence on the other end of the phone. I could practically hear Luciana's brain short-circuiting, trying to process the fact that her daughter, her own daughter, was not automatically taking her side in this situation. What? Clara, he was rude. He embarrassed me." "No, Mom," Clara continued, "and I was falling in love with my wife all over again in real time. He called you out for being rude. There's a difference. You literally called him a gold digger while he was sitting right there eating your tiramisu. What did you think was going to happen when he understood every word?" More silence. This one felt heavier, more loaded. I imagined Luciana standing in her pristine kitchen, probably already fully dressed and made up even though it wasn't even 7:30 a.m., her free hand clutching her pearls. Literally or figuratively, possibly both. "I didn't know he spoke Italian," Luciana said, but her voice had lost some of its fire. Now she just sounded defensive, which was at least a step in the right direction from full-blown outrage. "That's not really the point though, is it?" Clara replied, and I was genuinely proud of her for not backing down. "The point is you shouldn't have said it at all. In any language. About my husband. At your dinner table. While he was a guest in your home." I heard muffled sounds that might have been Luciana trying to formulate a response, or possibly just breathing heavily into the phone. "Hard to tell. He's a good man, Mom," Clara said, softer now. "He works hard. He treats me well, and he's never asked anyone for anything. You owe him an apology." And then Clara did something that absolutely killed me. She looked over at me, made direct eye contact, and mouthed the words, "I love you," while her mother continued sputtering on the other end of the line. The call went on for another few minutes, with Luciana gradually deflating from operatically offended to grudgingly contemplative. When Clara finally hung up, she flopped back onto the pillows and stared at the ceiling. "Well," she said, "that was fun." "Checkmate," I said, grinning at her. She turned her head to look at me. "She's not going to apologize, you know. Not directly. That's not how Luciana Romano operates." "I know," I replied. "But the fact that you stood up for me means everything." "You're my husband," she said simply. "That's literally my job description." I pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Still, thank you." "Thank me by making coffee," she mumbled into my chest. "It's too early for family drama without caffeine." Later that morning, after we'd caffeinated sufficiently and Clara had filled me in on the full details of the conversation, including the part where Luciana tried to claim she was just testing my character, which was absolutely ridiculous, but whatever. My phone buzzed with a text message. From Marco. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and slight dread, not sure what to expect. Was he going to yell at me via text? Demand I apologize? Uninvite me from future family gatherings? The message read, "You handled that better than I did in 20 years. Coffee sometime." I literally laughed out loud, startling Clara, who was curled up on the couch scrolling through her phone. "What's so funny? Your dad just asked me to get coffee," I said, showing her the message. Clara read it and smiled. "Of course he did. You're officially part of the Surviving Luciana Club now. It's very exclusive. Membership benefits include commiseration, war stories, and tactical advice on how to avoid controversial topics at holiday dinners." I typed back, "Would love to. Name the time and place." His response came almost immediately. "Tuesday, 10 a.m., that cafe on Maple Street." "And Liam? Welcome to the family. The real one." I showed Clara, and she actually got a little teary-eyed. "He never does this," she said quietly. "He never reaches out to people like this. You really impressed him." "I just spoke Italian and called out your mom," I said, confused by Marco's enthusiasm. "Exactly," Clara laughed. "Do you know how long he's been married to her? 32 years. 32 years of nodding and agreeing and strategically hiding in the garage. And you, on day 4 of being officially family, just waltzed in there and politely, but firmly told her she was out of line. In her native language. He probably thinks you're some kind of superhero." By Monday, the story had spread through my office faster than a rumor about free donuts in the break room. I'd made the mistake of mentioning it to my coworker Derek during our morning coffee run, and Derek, who has the discretion of a town crier with a megaphone, had apparently told everyone in the building by lunchtime. "Dude," my colleague Sarah said, rolling her chair over to my desk, "I heard you basically subtitled your mother-in-law's trash talk in real time." "That's actually a pretty accurate description," I admitted. "That's legendary," she said, high-fiving me. "Absolute legend status. I'm putting you in for Employee of the Month based purely on that story." "It's not really a work achievement," I pointed out. "It's an achievement in general human excellence," Sarah countered. "Same thing. Even my boss, who normally stayed out of personal drama, stopped by my desk that afternoon. "I hear you speak Italian," he said casually. "We've been trying to close a deal with a company in Milan. Any chance you'd be interested in helping with some translation work?" Sure," I said, slightly blindsided by this turn of events. "I'd be happy to help." "Great. Also, for what it's worth, my mother-in-law only speaks English and she still terrifies me. So the fact that you handled yours in 2 languages is genuinely impressive." Apparently, standing up to your mother-in-law was a universally relatable experience that transcended culture, language, and workplace boundaries. Tuesday morning came, and I met Marco at the cafe on Maple Street. A cozy little place with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the kind of pretentious coffee menu that uses words like notes of chocolate and bright acidity. Marco was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. "I ordered for you," he said as I sat down. "Black coffee, right? You seem like a black coffee guy." "Good call," I said, taking a sip. It was actually really good coffee, the kind that justified the ridiculous price. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just drinking our coffee and watching the morning crowd shuffle in and out, students with laptops, business people grabbing their caffeine fix, retired folks reading newspapers like it was still 1997. So, Marco finally said, setting down his cup and looking at me directly. That dinner. Yeah, I replied carefully. That dinner. Luciana's been difficult since then, he continued. Not angry exactly. More like deflated? Thoughtful. It's weird. I haven't seen her like this in years. I didn't mean to cause problems. I started, but Marco held up a hand. Problems? Son, you did me a favor. Do you know how long I've been married to that woman? How many times I've watched her steamroll people with her opinions and judgments? How many times I've wanted to say something but didn't because, well, you know, happy wife, happy life, and all that. But you love her, I said, because that seemed important to acknowledge. Of course I love her, Marco smiled. She's brilliant, she's passionate, she's loyal to a fault. But she's also stubborn and judgmental, and sometimes she needs someone to call her on her BS. And you did it perfectly, respectfully but firmly. In her own language, no less. I've been fantasizing about that moment for 3 decades. I laughed, relaxing into my chair. So I'm not banned from future family gatherings. Banned? Are you kidding? You're mandatory attendance now. I need an ally at that table. Marco grinned. Besides, Luciana respects you now. She won't admit it, probably not ever, but she does. You stood your ground. That's the only thing she really values. We talked for another hour, about everything and nothing, sports, work, his advice on navigating marriage, never go to bed angry, and always remember where you hid the good snacks. By the time we left, I realized I hadn't just gained a father-in-law. I'd gained a friend. As we walked to our cars, Marco clapped me on the shoulder. You know what you did the other night? Ruined dessert. He laughed. You translated respect. And that's a language Luciana understands perfectly. 2 weeks had passed since what I'd started calling the Italian incident in my head, though Clara preferred the Great Tiramisu takedown, and Marco had taken to referring to it as that time Liam broke my wife's brain. We'd all coped with the aftermath in our own ways, apparently. The dust had settled somewhat, the initial shock had worn off, and life had returned to a semi-normal rhythm. Semi-normal being the operative word here, because nothing is ever truly normal after you linguistically checkmate your mother-in-law at her own dinner table. Clara had been fielding periodic phone calls from Luciana, which had evolved from defensive and huffy to merely terse and businesslike, which I supposed was progress. They talked about neutral topics, the weather, Clara's work, a new recipe Luciana had tried, whether the neighbor's new fence was too tall, carefully skirting around the elephant in the room, or rather, the Italian-speaking son-in-law who'd revealed that the Empress had no linguistic clothes. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, Clara came home from work and dropped a bomb that I absolutely should have seen coming, but somehow didn't. My mom wants us over for dinner this weekend, she announced, setting her bag down and kicking off her shoes with the exhausted sigh of someone who'd spent 8 hours in meetings. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been pretending to work, but actually online shopping for a new coffee maker because our current one had started making sounds like it was summoning demons. Come again. Dinner. This weekend. Saturday night. My parents' house. Clara said it matter-of-factly, like she was announcing we needed to pick up milk, not that we were returning to the scene of the crime. Is this like a trap? I asked, only half joking. Am I going to show up and find out it's actually an intervention? Or a surprise Italian language competency test? Clara laughed, collapsing onto the couch next to me. It's just dinner. She specifically said she wants to try again. Her words. Try again, I repeated slowly. That sounds suspiciously like a person who's been coached by her husband to extend an olive branch. Oh, Marco definitely had something to do with this, Clara agreed. But still, progress is progress, right? So that's how, 2 days later, I found myself once again pulling up to the House of Judgment, though this time I was significantly less nervous and significantly more curious about how this was going to play out. Clara had assured me that Luciana had promised to be on her best behavior, which was either reassuring or ominous, depending on how you interpreted it. We walked up that same pristine stone pathway, past the pretentious fountain, toward the door with its fancy video doorbell that probably already knew we were coming and had filed a report. Before we could even knock, the door swung open. Marco stood there, and I swear the man looked relieved to see us, like we were reinforcements arriving at a siege. Liam, Clara, right on time. His enthusiasm was a little too bright, a little too forced, the tone of someone who'd been managing tense household dynamics for the past 14 days and was desperately hoping for a peaceful evening. Wouldn't dream of being late, I said, shaking his hand. Good, good, Marco said, ushering us inside. Luciana's in the kitchen putting the finishing touches on dinner. She's been cooking all day. The subtext was clear. She's been stress cooking all day because she's anxious about this dinner and doesn't know how to process emotions except through elaborate meal preparation. We moved into the living room, still pristine, still looking like a furniture showroom, still featuring those aggressively arranged throw pillows. And then she appeared. Luciana Romano, emerging from the kitchen like an actress making her entrance, except this time her energy was different. She was still impeccably dressed, still wearing pearls like armor, but something in her posture was less rigid, less commanding. She looked almost uncertain, which, for Luciana, was probably the emotional equivalent of anyone else having a complete meltdown. Liam, she said, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. So nice to see you again. The words were formal, careful, like she'd rehearsed them, like she was handling explosives and trying very hard not to trigger a detonation. Nice to see you too, Luciana, I replied, matching her tone of cautious diplomacy. How's work? She asked, and I had to give her credit. She was trying. Actually trying to make conversation without it immediately becoming an interrogation. Stable, I said, and then because I apparently can't help myself, I added, my colleagues now call me Google Translate. There was a beat of silence where everyone held their breath, and then Marco started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that echoed through the living room. Luciana shot him a glare that could have frozen lava, but I definitely noticed, the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but not quite not a smile either. Progress. Dinner was a considerably quieter affair than the last one. The table was still set with museum-quality dishware, the food was still elaborate, and probably took an entire day to prepare, but the atmosphere was different. Less performative, less tense. Luciana asked polite questions about Clara's work, about my work, about whether we'd had a chance to watch that new show everyone was talking about. The questions were surface level but genuinely interested, not loaded with hidden agenda or ulterior motive. She didn't switch to Italian once. Not even a little bit. Not even when she was talking to Marco about something mundane, like whether they needed more olive oil. She spoke English the entire evening, and I couldn't tell if that was out of respect, caution, or just sheer determination not to give me any ammunition. But here's the thing about sitting through dinner with someone who's trying very hard to be on their best behavior. You start to see the effort. And the effort itself is actually kind of endearing. Every time Luciana caught herself about to say something judgmental and visibly course-corrected, every time she took a breath before asking a question to make sure it wasn't invasive, every time she smiled at me without that edge of evaluation, it was visible. The woman was working overtime to reset our relationship, and I had to respect that. About halfway through the main course, some kind of chicken dish that was probably called something fancy in Italian, but I wisely didn't ask, something clattered in the kitchen. We all heard it, a distinct crash followed by the sound of liquid hitting the floor. The wine. Luciana gasped, jumping up from her chair. She rushed to the kitchen, and we all followed to find that a bottle of red wine had somehow fallen from the counter and shattered on the floor, creating a crimson crime scene all over her pristine white tiles. Oh no, Luciana muttered, already grabbing paper towels, her carefully maintained composure cracking. The grout will stain. I just had these cleaned. Hey, it's okay, I said, and before I could overthink it, I knelt down and started helping her clean up the glass. Just wine. Just tiles. Nothing that can't be fixed. Clara grabbed the mop while Marco got the dustpan, and for a few minutes we all just worked together cleaning up the mess. No drama, no blame, just a family dealing with a minor domestic disaster. When the floor was finally clean, or at least clean enough that we weren't going to track red footprints through the house, Luciana stood up and looked at me. Really looked at me, like she was seeing me properly for the first time. Thank you, she said quietly. For helping. Of course, I replied. Besides, accidents happen to everyone. Even the best. I paused, then added with a slight grin, and the bilingual. I held my breath. not sure if the joke would land or if I'd just torpedoed the entire evening's worth of détente. Luciana stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, and I'm not making this up, she chuckled. Actually chuckled. It was small, barely more than an exhale with humor attached, but it was genuine. Even the bilingual, she repeated, shaking her head. You're terrible. I've been told, I said, and Marco laughed from behind us. We returned to dinner, and something had shifted. The conversation flowed more naturally. Luciana told a story about her own mother, Clara's grandmother, who apparently had been even more formidable and judgmental than she was, which explained a lot, actually. Marco chimed in with embarrassing stories about Clara as a kid, which she pretended to hate but was clearly enjoying. I contributed some stories about my own chaotic family gatherings, including the time my uncle tried to deep fry a turkey and nearly burned down the garage. When dessert came out, panna cotta this time, not tiramisu, probably a strategic choice. Luciana served it without ceremony or comment. We ate and talked, and it felt almost normal, like we were just a family having dinner, not actors performing carefully scripted roles. As the evening wound down and Clara and I prepared to leave, Luciana walked us to the door. Marco had already given us both hugs and extracted a promise from me to meet for coffee again soon, and now it was just the three of us standing in that grand foyer. Thank you for coming, Luciana said, directing the comment mostly at me. I know the last time was difficult. Water under the bridge, I said, meaning it. Or wine under the tiles, as the case may be. She smiled. Actually smiled, a real one that reached her eyes. You're growing on me, Liam. Slowly. Like mold. I laughed, surprised and delighted by the comparison. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Don't let it go to your head, she replied. But there was warmth in her voice now, actual warmth. In the car on the way home, Clara grabbed my hand and squeezed it. That went well, she said, sounding almost surprised. It did, I agreed. Your mom made an effort. A real one. She called you mold, Clara pointed out. Affectionately. I protested. That was affectionate mold comparison. Totally different from regular mold comparison. Clara laughed, and I realized something important. We were going to be okay. All of us. It wasn't going to be perfect, and there would probably be more awkward dinners and tense moments and cultural misunderstandings. But we'd figured out how to communicate. In English, in Italian, and in the universal language of cleaning up spilled wine together. And sometimes, that's all you really need. Months passed, and something unexpected happened. Luciana softened. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually, like ice melting in spring. She started sending random texts at weird hours. Recipe links at 6 a.m. News articles about topics she thought I'd find interesting. Baby name ideas, which was absolutely wild considering Clara and I weren't even pregnant and had never mentioned having kids anytime soon. Why is your mom sending me a list of Italian baby names? I asked Clara one morning, staring at my phone in confusion. Because she's planning your entire future, Clara replied without looking up from her coffee. Just roll with it. The texts kept coming. Sometimes they were helpful. This article about retirement planning might interest you. Sometimes they were random. Did you know flamingos can only eat with their heads upside down? And sometimes they were just nice. Hope you're having a good day. Then one evening, my phone rang. Luciana's name appeared on the screen, and I genuinely considered not answering because phone calls from your mother-in-law rarely bring good news. A year later, Clara and I hosted them for dinner. Same menu, same setup, but now I was the cook, which felt like some kind of cosmic role reversal. I'd spent all afternoon preparing lasagna using a recipe Luciana had texted me months earlier, and honestly, it turned out pretty damn good. When Luciana took her first bite, she looked genuinely impressed. This is excellent, Liam. Really excellent. Careful, I said, grinning. That's how you end up liking your son-in-law. Too late, she smirked. I already do. We laughed, all of us, and it felt natural. Real. After dessert, Luciana did something that shocked me. She switched to Italian. Slowly, nervously, like she was testing out new words. Grazie, per avermi insegnato il rispetto. Thank you for teaching me respect. I raised my glass, feeling my throat tighten unexpectedly. And thank you for teaching me patience, and how not to choke on tiramisu. Everyone laughed. That night, I realized something important. Families don't always start with love. They sometimes start with translation. My wife said, "I'm changing my last name. I'm moving in with a real man," my wife beamed. I calmly co-signed. A week later, her own father stormed in, white as a sheet, holding a notice. "The name," he choked out. "Tell me you didn't just let him void the family name." Look, I've sat through some pretty uncomfortable dinners in my life. There was that Thanksgiving when Uncle Jerry got drunk and started explaining his cryptocurrency portfolio to the mashed potatoes. And then there was the time my mother-in-law spent 3 hours describing her bunion surgery in excruciating detail while we tried to eat lasagna. But tonight? Tonight was about to become the heavyweight champion of awkward dining experiences, and I didn't even know it yet. The restaurant was one of those places where they put the menu in a leather binder like it's the Constitution, and the waiter introduces himself like you're about to become lifelong pen pals. "Good evening, I'm Sebastian, and I'll be guiding your culinary journey this evening." "Sure, Sebastian. Guide away, buddy. Just bring me something with carbs, and don't judge me when I pronounce quinoa wrong." Marissa had been acting weird all week. Not her usual brand of weird, which involved reorganizing the pantry at 2 in the morning or watching true crime documentaries while doing Pilates. No, this was a different flavor of strange. She'd been texting constantly, smiling at her phone like it was telling her jokes I wasn't cool enough to hear, and she'd bought a new dress specifically for this dinner. A red one. The kind of red that says, "I'm about to make a scene," in every language including sign language. I should have known something was coming when she invited her entire friend group. Sarah, who thinks namaste is a personality trait. Jennifer, who's been divorced 3 times and treats marriage like a subscription service she keeps canceling. And Rebecca, who once told me at a barbecue that my energy was very beige. Thanks, Rebecca. Your energy is very unemployed, but I kept that observation to myself because I'm classy like that. The appetizers had just arrived. Some kind of deconstructed bruschetta that looked like someone had a fight with a tomato and lost. When Marissa stood up, she actually stood up, right there in the middle of the restaurant, and picked up her wine glass. My first thought was, oh God, she's pregnant. My second thought was, wait, we haven't had sex in 4 months, so that would be quite the miracle. My third thought never got to finish forming because that's when she started talking. "I have an announcement," she said, and her voice had that practice quality, like she'd been rehearsing this in the car. Probably had. Probably used the rearview mirror as her audience and everything. The entire table went quiet. Even Sebastian, who was hovering nearby with a pepper grinder the size of a baseball bat, froze like someone had hit pause on him. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight," Marissa continued, "and I'm sitting there thinking this is either a really elaborate birthday surprise I forgot about, or I'm about to become a character in someone's therapy session. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching lately, and I've realized that I deserve more. I deserve to be with someone who truly sees me, who values me, who makes me feel alive. Oh boy, here we go." I could feel the temperature in the room drop about 15 degrees, and not because Sebastian had opened a window. This was the kind of cold that comes from impending social disaster, the kind weathermen should warn you about. "So," she said, and she clinked her glass with a spoon like we were at a wedding reception and she was about to roast the groom. "I've decided to make a change. I'm changing my last name." She paused for dramatic effect, really letting that sentence marinate in the shocked silence. "I'm moving in with a real man." The gasps that erupted around that table could have powered a small wind turbine. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah knocked over her water glass. Rebecca looked like she'd just witnessed a UFO landing in the breadbasket. And me? I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, still holding a piece of that deconstructed bruschetta that was now probably the most stable thing at this table. That's when I noticed him. Grant. He'd been sitting 2 tables over, and now he was standing up with this smile that could only be described as predatory. The guy looked like a used car salesman who'd just convinced someone to buy the extended warranty on a 1987 Civic. He was wearing a tuxedo to a casual dinner, which should have been my first red flag. But hindsight is 2020, and I was still processing the fact that my wife had just announced our divorce like it was a gender reveal party. He walked over, actually strutted, like he was on a runway in Milan instead of a moderately priced Italian restaurant in the suburbs, and put his arm around Marissa. She melted into him like butter on hot pancakes, and her friends started clapping. Actually clapping. Like this was a performance, and they were the audience giving a standing ovation to the death of my marriage. Ben's been so understanding about all of this, Marissa said, looking at me with what I can only describe as manufactured pity. He knows I need to follow my heart. Understanding? Lady, I didn't even understand why you bought 17 throw pillows for a couch that seats 3 people. But sure, let's pretend I'm on board with this circus. Grant extended his hand to me. No hard feelings, man. Sometimes people just grow apart. I looked at his hand like it was offering me a timeshare presentation, but I shook it anyway because my mother raised me with manners, even if his mother apparently raised him in a barn where they taught advanced courses in home wrecking. None at all, I said, and I meant it. Not because I'm some enlightened Buddha figure who's above earthly emotions, but because I was too busy doing mental math. See, there was something these 2 lovebirds didn't know. Something Marissa had clearly forgotten in her rush to find a real man who probably couldn't change a tire without calling AAA. Marissa pulled out papers from her purse. Actual papers. She'd brought divorce documents to dinner like they were the dessert menu. I just need you to sign these, she said sweetly. I've already had my lawyer look everything over. It's all very straightforward. Straightforward. Right. I scanned the documents quickly. Standard stuff, mostly. Division of assets, custody arrangements. We don't have kids, thank God. And there it was, her request to legally change her name from Hollis to Grant. Effective immediately. I pulled out my pen, a nice one, a Mont Blanc my grandfather gave me, which felt appropriate for what was about to happen, and I signed. Just like that. Signed away 12 years of marriage with the same flourish I used to sign credit card receipts at Target. The table erupted in more applause. Jennifer was crying happy tears. Sarah was already taking photos for what I assumed would become an Instagram post about female empowerment. Rebecca nodded at me approvingly, like I'd finally done something that elevated my beige energy to maybe a light tan. You're being so mature about this, Marissa said, and she actually looked surprised. Like she'd expected me to flip the table or challenge Grant to a duel or something equally dramatic. Of course, I said, raising my wine glass. To new beginnings. May your real man teach you about real consequences. They all drank to that, completely missing the second part of my toast. Grant ordered champagne. The expensive kind. On my credit card, naturally. I didn't even flinch. Let him have his moment. Let them all have their moment. Because while they were toasting and taking selfies and planning Marissa's new life as Mrs. Grant, I was thinking about a conversation I'd had with my grandfather about 20 years ago. We'd been sitting in his study, the one that smelled like old books and older money, and he'd tapped a thick leather binder on his desk. Benjamin, he'd said, using my full name like he always did when he was about to drop knowledge. The Hollis name isn't just a name. It's a contract. It's a legacy. And there are rules. He'd opened that binder and pointed to a clause. Provision 9b, it was called. Never let anyone disrespect this name. And if they do, if they voluntarily remove themselves from it, make sure they understand what they're giving up. At the time, I'd been 19 and more interested in whether I could borrow his car for the weekend. But now those words were echoing in my head like a prophecy finally coming true. I watched Marissa and Grant feed each other tiramisu, and I smiled. A real smile. The kind that comes from knowing something nobody else at the table knows. She thought she was leaving me. But really? She'd just signed herself out of something much bigger than a marriage. She'd voluntarily exited the Hollis family trust, the Hollis estate, and every single benefit that came with carrying that last name. And the best part? She did it in front of witnesses, with legal documentation, while wearing a red dress and drinking champagne she couldn't afford. More wine? Sebastian asked, appearing at my elbow with impeccable timing. Please, I said, and keep it coming. I'm celebrating. Celebrating what, sir? I looked at Marissa, who was now showing off her new last name by practicing her signature on a napkin like a teenager doodling her crush's name in a notebook. My wife just pressed the self-destruct button on her entire future, I said quietly, and she thinks it's a launch pad. Sebastian looked confused, but he poured the wine anyway. Good man, Sebastian. Very good man indeed. I got home around 11, which was impressive considering I'd consumed enough wine to pickle a small elephant. The Uber driver tried to make conversation about cryptocurrency, and I just nodded along while mentally calculating how much money Marissa had just cost herself. Spoiler alert, it was more than whatever Bitcoin was worth that week. The house was empty. Obviously, Marissa had apparently moved out while we were at dinner. which showed a level of pre-planning that would have been impressive if it wasn't being used to nuke her own financial stability. Her closet was cleared out, her bathroom counter was bare except for one bobby pin she'd missed, and there was a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'll send someone for the rest of my things." Sure, sweetheart. Send whoever you want. Just make sure they have the security clearance, because after tomorrow morning, this house is going to have more locks than Fort Knox. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. The good stuff, the 18-year-old Pappy Van Winkle that Marissa always said was too expensive to actually drink. Well, guess what? Tonight felt like the perfect occasion. I grabbed the bottle, grabbed a glass, and headed to my office, the one room in this house that Marissa had never bothered to understand or care about. See, Marissa thought my office was where I played video games and avoided her requests to organize the garage. She wasn't entirely wrong, but she'd missed the filing cabinet in the corner. The one that required 2 keys and a combination to open. The one that held documents she'd never bothered to ask about because she assumed Hollis was just my last name and nothing more. That was her first mistake. Well, technically her second, if we're counting Grant as mistake number 1. I unlocked the cabinet and pulled out the binder. It was thick, leather-bound, and had that old document smell that somehow makes everything inside seem more official and slightly intimidating. The cover had 3 words embossed in gold lettering: Hollis Family Holdings. Now, let me paint you a picture here. The Hollis family isn't Rockefeller-level rich or anything, but we're comfortable. Very comfortable. The kind of comfortable where you don't have to check your bank account before buying things, and you can afford to have opinions about wine regions. My great-great-grandfather made his fortune in railroads back when that was still a thing people did, and every generation since has been smart enough not to blow it all on yachts and bad investments. We own property. A lot of property. Commercial buildings downtown, a few apartment complexes, some land that keeps getting more valuable as the city expands outward like America's waistline. We have a foundation that does charitable work and also serves as a convenient tax shelter. We have investments managed by people whose entire job is to make our money have more money, like some kind of financial mitosis. And all of it, every single asset, every account, every benefit, is tied to one thing: the Hollis name. I flipped through the binder, past the property deeds and stock certificates, past the trust documents and corporate bylaws, until I found the page I was looking for. It was in the section my grandfather had labeled Family Law and Legacy Protection, which sounds like something out of a medieval kingdom, but is actually just rich people code for how to make sure gold diggers don't get our stuff. There it was. Provision 9B. I'd read it 100 times over the years, usually when I was bored and avoiding real work, but I'd never actually thought I'd need to use it. It was like a fire extinguisher, good to have around, hopefully never necessary. The provision was written in that special language lawyers use when they want to make sure something is both crystal clear and completely incomprehensible to normal humans. But the summary version, the part my grandfather had written in the margin in his chicken scratch handwriting, was beautifully simple. Legal name disassociation equals permanent forfeiture of all trust entitlements. Let me translate that into English for you. If anyone who marries into the Hollis family voluntarily decides to drop the Hollis name, not through divorce, mind you, but through active choice, they immediately and permanently lose access to everything the trust provides. And the trust provides a lot. We're talking about the penthouse apartment Marissa had been living in rent-free. The car she drove, a Mercedes SUV that cost more than most people's houses. The credit cards linked to family accounts. The health insurance that covered everything, including that elective procedure she got last year that she swore was medically necessary, but was really just cosmetic. The country club membership. The investment account that had been set up in her name as a wedding gift. The education fund we'd established for future children that she'd recently been eyeing for a personal development retreat in Bali. All of it. Gone. Poof. Vanished like my will to live during Marissa's juice cleanse phase. And the best part? She'd done it to herself. I didn't force her. I didn't trick her. I literally signed the papers she brought me. She'd voluntarily, enthusiastically, in front of witnesses and with legal documentation, removed herself from the Hollis name. I took a long sip of bourbon and felt it burn its way down my throat in the most satisfying way possible. This was better than any revenge I could have planned. This was poetic justice, served with a side of karmic irony. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Gerald. Gerald Pemberton, senior partner at Whitmore and Associates, the law firm that had been handling Hollis family business since before I was born. Gerald was probably in his 70s now, but he had the mind of a legal shark and the disposition of someone who genuinely enjoyed crushing people's dreams when they deserved it. It was almost midnight, but Gerald had once told me, "Benjamin, if you ever need me to destroy someone's life at an inconvenient hour, please don't hesitate to call." I'm paraphrasing, but that was the general vibe. The phone rang 3 times before his gravelly voice answered. "Benjamin Hollis. It's been a while. Someone finally do something stupid enough to warrant activating the family protocols." "Gerald, my friend, you're going to love this," I said, and I could hear myself grinning through the words. My wife just voluntarily dropped the Hollis name, signed the papers herself, announced it at dinner in front of witnesses, even posted about it on social media before we left the restaurant. There was a pause, and then Gerald started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, a full-on, wheezing belly laugh that sounded like it might require medical intervention. "Oh, she finally said the line, didn't she?" With enthusiasm, I confirmed. "She's changing it to Grant. Moving in with her real man." I put air quotes around that last part even though he couldn't see them. "A real man," Gerald repeated, still chuckling. "Does this real man know about Provision 9B? I'm going to go ahead and guess no." "Outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. Do you want me to start the paperwork tonight, or would you like to savor this moment a bit longer?" "Activate it," I said. "Effective immediately. I want every account frozen, every access code changed, every benefit suspended by the time she wakes up tomorrow morning. Make it thorough, Gerald. Make it biblical." "Biblical. I like that. Consider it done. I'll have my team start processing everything within the hour. We'll send official notification letters, update all the relevant institutions, and make sure every single thing tied to the Hollis Trust is locked down tighter than a duck's ass in a windstorm." Gerald had a way with words. "Oh, and Benjamin," he added, "I've been waiting 40 years for someone to trigger this clause. Your grandfather would be proud. He always said that Provision would catch someone eventually. He just never thought it would be a spouse who essentially divorced herself out of a fortune." "She thinks she's upgrading," I said. "She thinks wrong," Gerald replied. "I'll email you the confirmation paperwork in the morning. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a beautiful day." He hung up, and I sat there in my office, staring at that binder, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. I felt vindicated. Not angry, not sad, not even particularly bitter. Just satisfied. Marissa had spent our entire marriage treating the Hollis name like it was just a label, something decorative she wore to dinner parties. She'd never asked about the family business, never shown interest in the legacy, never bothered to understand that being a Hollis meant something beyond having a fancy signature. She'd introduce herself as Marissa at events, actively avoiding using the last name. She'd roll her eyes when my uncle talked about family obligations. She'd once said at Thanksgiving, and I quote, "It's just a name. It's not like it defines who you are." Well, sweetheart, turns out it kind of does. At least financially. I closed the binder and put it back in the cabinet, locking it with the same care someone might use to seal a tomb. Ancient curses and all that. Then I went to the kitchen, got the entire bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, and sat on the couch in the dark, drinking expensive bourbon and thinking about how my grandfather used to say, "The best revenge is living well, but the second best revenge is watching someone destroy themselves while you do absolutely nothing." I didn't have to yell, didn't have to fight, didn't have to be the bad guy in this story. I just had to sit back, sign some papers, and let the legal system do exactly what it was designed to do: protect the family legacy from people who didn't respect it. My phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram. Marissa had posted a photo of her and Grant in front of what looked like his apartment building. The caption read, "Starting my new chapter with my new name and my new love. Hashtag fresh start, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag real love, hashtag Marissa Grant." I stared at that hashtag. Marissa Grant. She'd already changed it. Already committed. Already sealed her fate with a social media post. I raised my glass to the screen. "Welcome to your new chapter, Marissa Grant. I hope it has good Wi-Fi, because you're going to need it when you start Googling how to afford rent." Then I drank the rest of my bourbon, turned off my phone, and went to bed in the California king-size bed that was now entirely, gloriously, legally mine. Tomorrow morning, Gerald's team would start the process. By tomorrow afternoon, Marissa would start realizing her mistake. By tomorrow evening, she'd be panicking. But tonight? Tonight, I slept like a baby. A wealthy, vindicated baby wrapped in 800 thread count sheets that she'd never touch again. Waking up the morning after your wife publicly dumps you should feel terrible, right? There should be some kind of emotional devastation. Maybe a montage where I listen to sad songs and eat ice cream directly from the container while wearing the same sweatpants for 3 days straight. Instead, I woke up feeling like I'd won the lottery, except better because lottery winners don't get to watch their ex-wives step on a legal landmine while wearing designer heels. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, the whole 9 yards. Marissa used to do this thing where she'd make herself a green smoothie that looked like liquefied grass clippings and then judge me for eating inflammatory foods. Well, Marissa, guess what's inflammatory? Voluntarily making yourself poor. That's what's inflammatory. My phone had been suspiciously quiet all morning, which meant Gerald's team was working faster than I'd expected. It was like watching a military operation, except instead of airstrikes, they were launching legal documents. I checked my email while eating my definitely inflammatory bacon. There it was, a message from Gerald with the subject line, Operation Name Drop, Status Update. The man had a sense of humor that would make most people uncomfortable, which is exactly why he'd been the family lawyer for 40 years. The email was beautiful in its efficiency. Every account had been frozen. Every access code had been changed. Every benefit had been suspended. The penthouse apartment's locks had been changed at 6 a.m. by a locksmith who apparently didn't ask questions when you paid him enough. The Mercedes dealership had been notified that the vehicle lease was terminated. The country club had removed her membership. Even her gym access had been revoked, which felt petty but also incredibly satisfying. Gerald had attached a PDF titled Comprehensive Asset Reclamation Summary, which was lawyer speak for here's everything we took away from her. It was 17 pages long. 17 pages of things Marissa had enjoyed as a Hollis that she would no longer enjoy as a Grant. I was on page 6, reading about the cancellation of her premium cable package. Apparently, we were paying for HBO, Showtime, and Stars, which explained why our entertainment budget looked like a small country's GDP when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, another call. Same unknown number. Then a text. Ben, pick up your phone right now. Oh, there she was. I'd been wondering how long it would take. I let it ring 4 more times before I answered, making sure to sound slightly confused, like I'd just woken up from a nap. Hello. What the hell did you do? Marissa's voice came through the phone like a tornado made of rage and expensive hairspray. Good morning to you too, sweetheart. How's the fresh start going? Don't you dare. My key doesn't work. My cards aren't working. My CR is gone. What did you do? I took a sip of my coffee. Colombian blend, medium roast, way better than those pretentious artisanal beans she used to buy from that coffee shop where the baristas all had handlebar mustaches and opinions about capitalism. I didn't do anything. You're the one who changed your name, remember? That has nothing to do with. Actually, it has everything to do with it. See, when you dropped the Hollis name, you also dropped all the Hollis benefits. It's in the family trust documentation. Provision 9B. Real catchy stuff. Gerald sent me the paperwork last night. Want me to forward it to you? Silence on the other end. Not peaceful silence. The kind of silence that happens right before a volcano erupts or a divorce gets really expensive. Oh wait, the divorce was already expensive. For her, anyway. You can't do this, she finally said, and her voice had gone from angry to something else. Panicked, maybe? Desperate? I couldn't quite place it, but it was definitely in the neighborhood of, oh crap, I really screwed up. I didn't do anything, I repeated. You signed the papers. You announced it publicly. You posted it on Instagram with hashtags and everything. You changed your name to Grant of your own free will. The trust just responded accordingly. But the apartment, Ben. My stuff is in there. My clothes, your stuff will be boxed up and delivered to whatever address you provide. Gerald's team is very thorough. They'll even use good boxes, not like those flimsy ones from the grocery store. First class all the way. This is insane. You're being vindictive. I laughed. Actually laughed. Vindictive would be me fighting you in court for years. Vindictive would be me making this difficult. Vindictive would be me doing literally anything other than exactly what you asked for. You wanted to be a Grant? Congratulations. You're a Grant. Grants don't have access to Hollis assets. Pretty simple math. My father is going to hear about this. Oh, I'm counting on it, I said cheerfully. In fact, tell him to check his business accounts. There might be some interesting developments there too. Another silence. This one lasted longer. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out what that meant. What are you talking about? Her voice had gone quiet now. Dangerous quiet. Your dad's company, Harold's Commercial Enterprises, or whatever he's calling it these days. Who do you think guarantees his business loans? Who do you think co-signed his line of credit? I'll give you a hint. It rhymes with Molly's Family Trust. The sound she made was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. You wouldn't. I wouldn't, I agreed. But the trust bylaws would. See, there's this thing called association by marriage. When you're a Hollis, your immediate family gets certain benefits. Better loan terms, better credit ratings, better everything. But when you stop being a Hollis, I trailed off, letting her imagination fill in the blanks. My brother's internship, she whispered. Also connected to the family name. Nepotism's great when it works for you, isn't it? Ben, please. We can fix this. I can change my name back. Can you, though? Because I'm pretty sure legal name changes aren't like Netflix subscriptions. You can't just cancel and restart whenever you want. There's paperwork, processing time, and even if you did change it back, the trust clause is pretty specific. Voluntary disassociation is permanent. You disassociated, voluntarily, in front of witnesses, while wearing red. Why are you doing this? And now she was crying. Real tears, not the manipulative ones she used to deploy when she wanted a new handbag or for me to agree to host her mother for Thanksgiving. I'm not doing anything, I said for the third time. You did this. You stood up in that restaurant and announced to everyone that you were leaving me for a real man. You posted about it on social media. You celebrated your new life. I'm just letting you live it. But I didn't know. That's the thing, Marissa. You never knew. You never asked. You never cared. You just assumed the money and the lifestyle would follow you wherever you went because you're pretty and charming and people usually give you what you want. But the Hollis family isn't people. It's a legacy. And legacies don't care about your feelings or your fresh starts. She was full-on sobbing now. Grant said you wouldn't do anything. He said you were too weak to fight back. Oh, Grant said that, did he? Interesting. Tell your real man that real men read contracts before they encourage their girlfriends to commit financial suicide. Also tell him the champagne he ordered at dinner last week. That was $400 a bottle. Hope he saved the receipt. What? The credit card he used. Or should I say, you used. That was the Hollis family card. It's been canceled. The charge got reversed this morning. So technically, he's about to get a bill from that restaurant for about $1,200, give or take, including Sebastian's tip, which was generous because I was in a good mood. The sobbing stopped. Now there was just breathing. Heavy, angry breathing. You planned this, she said. I didn't plan anything. I just understood the rules of the game you didn't know we were playing. I hate you. You're entitled to your feelings. But hate doesn't pay rent, Marissa. Might want to figure that out before the first of the month. She hung up. Didn't even say goodbye. Rude. I finished my breakfast, did the dishes, because I'm civilized, and then spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in years, whatever I wanted. I went for a run without Marissa complaining that I was going to track dirt into the house. I watched a movie she would have hated. I ordered Chinese food for lunch even though she always insisted it was too greasy and not organic. Around 3 p.m., I decided to check social media. I know. It's like picking at a scab, but sometimes you just need to see the damage. Marissa's Instagram was a goldmine of delusion. She'd posted 6 times in the past week, all of them documenting her new life. There was a photo of her and Grant holding hands in front of his apartment building with the caption, "Home is where the heart is." There was a selfie of her with her new driver's license showing her new last name. There was even a video of her packing boxes with the caption, "Out with the old, in with the new." But the post from this morning was my favorite. It was a photo of her and Grant in front of a BMW. Not the Mercedes she used to drive. A different car. His car, presumably. The caption read, "My real man knows how to treat me right. New name, new life, new adventures. Hashtag Marissa Grant, hashtag fresh start, hashtag living my best life." I read it 3 times, savoring every word like fine wine. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done, but absolutely didn't regret. I commented, "Nice car. You should read the fine print on those lease agreements. Also, how's the apartment situation working out? Get those locks figured out yet?" The comment posted. I watched it sit there for exactly 43 seconds before it disappeared. Deleted. Too late, though. 17 people had already liked it, including Jennifer, Sarah, and Rebecca, her so-called friends who were apparently enjoying the drama as much as I was. My phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. "I see you're poking the bear. Professional advice. Stop. Personal advice. Keep going. This is hilarious." I texted back. "Just being helpful. Someone needs to explain reality to her. Reality is about to get very clear. The bank just processed the account freezes. Her father called my office 6 times in the past hour. I'm having my assistant tell him I'm in Barbados." "Are you in Barbados?" "I'm in my office eating a sandwich." "But he doesn't need to know that." I grinned at my phone. Gerald was earning every penny of his absolutely ridiculous hourly rate. Another text came through. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "You're going to regret this. Grant." Oh, the real man was weighing in now. How delightful. I texted back. "Only thing I regret is not activating that trust clause sooner. Tell me, how much is your rent?" Asking for a friend who's about to need roommates. He didn't respond. Coward. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading through the trust documents, not because I needed to, but because I was genuinely fascinated by how thoroughly my grandfather had protected the family assets. Every possible loophole was closed. Every potential exploit was accounted for. It was like reading a legal thriller, except it was real and Marissa was the unsuspecting victim. That night, I slept better than I had in years. No snoring from Marissa. No cold feet pressed against my legs. Number 2 a.m. wake-ups because she heard a noise that turned out to be the house settling. Just me, my California king bed, and the sweet, sweet sound of consequences catching up to people who absolutely deserve them. I was making myself a spectacular lunch, grilled cheese with 3 different kinds of cheese because I'm an adult and I can do what I want, when the pounding started. Not knocking. Pounding. The kind of aggressive door assault that makes you think either the police are here with a warrant or someone's about to have a really bad day. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the police. I looked through the peephole, and there he was. Harold Mitchell, my soon-to-be former father-in-law, looking like he'd just run a marathon through a car wash. His face was red enough to be a health hazard. His hair was doing that thing where it sticks up in weird places because he'd been running his hands through it. And he was sweating through his dress shirt like he'd just finished filming an infomercial for antiperspirant. That doesn't work. He pounded again. "Benjamin, open this door right now." I took a bite of my grilled cheese, chewed thoughtfully, and then opened the door with the kind of casual energy you'd use to greet a pizza delivery guy, not your enraged father-in-law, who looked like he was one blood pressure spike away from a medical emergency. "Harold, what a pleasant surprise. I wasn't expecting company. Come on in, I guess." He didn't wait for me to finish the sentence. He stormed past me like a linebacker on a mission, nearly knocking over the coat rack in the process. In his hand was a letter. Not just any letter. One of those official-looking ones with the law firm's letterhead that practically screams, "Your life is about to get complicated." I closed the door and leaned against it, still holding my grilled cheese. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee? A paper bag to breathe into?" "Don't you dare," he snarled, spinning around to face me. His finger was pointing at me like he was trying to cast a spell, or maybe just struggling to remember how pointing works when you're that angry. "Don't you dare act like this is funny." "I'm not acting like it's funny," I said, taking another bite. "I genuinely find it hilarious. There's a difference." His face somehow got redder. I didn't know that was physically possible, but Harold was apparently breaking new ground in cardiovascular stress responses. "Where is my daughter?" "Hopefully at her new place with her new man, living her new life. You know, the fresh start she posted about? With the hashtags? Very inspiring stuff, really. I almost cried. You know what I mean." He slammed the letter down on my kitchen counter with enough force that I worried about the granite. That counter cost a fortune and it was mine now, so I'd appreciate it if he didn't damage it. "Tell me you didn't let her change the name." I set down my grilled cheese, mostly because this conversation was about to require my full attention and I didn't want to accidentally drop melted cheese on my shirt. "I didn't let her do anything. She's a grown woman. She made a choice. I supported her choice by signing the papers she asked me to sign. I was being respectful of her autonomy. Isn't that what you always told me I should do? Support her decisions. That's not. He stopped, took a breath that sounded like it hurt, and tried again. You knew what would happen. You knew about the trust. I did, I agreed cheerfully. Did she? His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish that had just realized it was out of water and severely underprepared for air breathing. She's my daughter. And she was my wife. Past tense. By her choice. Announced publicly. In red. Did I mention she wore red? Very dramatic. Sebastian the waiter was riveted. Harold pressed his hands against my counter, leaning forward like he was trying to physically intimidate me through posture alone. It might have worked if I wasn't currently riding the high of justified revenge and excellent cheese. Do you have any idea what this means? Oh, I have several ideas. Why don't you tell me which one you're most concerned about? He grabbed the letter and shoved it at me. This is what I'm concerned about. I took it, unfolded it, and pretended to read it for the first time, even though I'd already seen a copy in my email. It was from Harold's bank, professionally informing him that his business line of credit was being reevaluated, and that his loan guarantees were being reviewed due to changes in guarantor status. Translation: Harold's business was built on a house of cards, and I'd just removed the bottom card by letting Marissa remove herself from the Hollis family. Huh, I said, looking up at him. That's unfortunate. Have you tried calling them? I called them. His voice cracked. Actually cracked. They said the Hollis Family Trust is withdrawing as guarantor on all my accounts. My accounts, Benjamin. My business accounts. Do you understand what that means? It means you should probably have a backup plan that doesn't involve being related to me. This will destroy me. The company can't operate without that credit line. I have payroll in 2 weeks. I have contracts that require bonding. I have. He stopped, putting his hand on his chest like he was checking to make sure his heart was still there. I have built this business over 30 years. That's impressive, I said, and I meant it. Sort of. But here's a question. Did you build it on your own merit? Or did you build it on the Hollis family's credit rating? His face did something complicated. Anger mixed with shame mixed with the dawning realization that maybe his success had been on loan this whole time. Your grandfather offered, he said quietly. When Marissa and I got married. He said family helps family. He said the Hollis name could open doors. And it did, I agreed. It opened a lot of doors. Better interest rates. Better terms. Better everything. But those doors stay open as long as you're family. Marissa decided she didn't want to be family anymore. So the doors closed. That's not revenge, Harold. That's just how the system works. She didn't know. He was shouting again. She's not a business person. She doesn't understand these things. Maybe she should have asked before she decided to publicly humiliate me at dinner while announcing her new relationship with a guy who looks like he sells timeshares. Grant is none of my business, I interrupted. Just like your business is about to be none of mine. See how that works? Harold pulled out one of my kitchen chairs and sat down without being invited. He looked defeated. Broken. Like someone had just explained to him that everything he thought was his was actually borrowed, and now the loan was being called in. For a second, just a second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the engagement party where he'd spent an hour telling everyone how his daughter could do better than me. I remembered the Christmas where he'd made a joke about how the Hollis family money was old money, which means it's almost gone. I remembered every condescending comment, every backhanded compliment, every time he'd treated me like I was lucky to be married to his precious daughter. The almost guilt evaporated like morning dew in the desert. Can we fix this? Harold asked, and his voice was different now. Smaller. Desperate. There has to be a way to fix this. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, adopting my best concerned friend expression. Sure. There's a way. It's actually pretty simple. His head snapped up. What? What do I need to do? Invent time travel. His face fell. Benjamin. No, seriously. Go back in time and tell your daughter that the Hollis name isn't just a name. Tell her it's a contract, a legacy, a network of benefits and protections that took 5 generations to build. Tell her that dropping it to be with her real man is possibly the dumbest financial decision anyone in your family has ever made. And that's including your brother who bought that restaurant that served nothing but mac and cheese variations. That restaurant was ahead of its time, Harold muttered. It went bankrupt in 4 months. The mac and cheese market wasn't ready for innovation. I almost laughed. Even in crisis, Harold couldn't admit defeat on the mac and cheese thing. Look, here's the reality. Marissa voluntarily disassociated herself from the Hollis name. The trust documents are crystal clear. Provision 9b. Voluntary name disassociation equals permanent forfeiture. Permanent, Harold. That's not a negotiable word. But surely there's an exception. A grace period. Something. There's not. My grandfather wrote those provisions specifically to prevent situations like this. He didn't want people treating the Hollis name like a rental car. Something you use for convenience and return when you find something shinier. So that's it. My business collapses because my daughter fell in love. Your business collapses because your daughter decided the Hollis name wasn't good enough for her. There's a difference. If she'd just divorced me like a normal person, you'd be fine. The trust has divorce provisions. Spousal support, division of assets, all that stuff. But she didn't divorce me and keep the name. She divorced me and threw the name away like it was trash. Like I was trash. Like my entire family was trash. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She was unhappy. I know. She felt ignored. I know that too. You worked too much. You didn't pay attention to her." "Harold," I said, leaning forward, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. Yes, I worked a lot. Yes, our marriage had problems. Yes, I probably could have been a better husband. But you know what I didn't do? I didn't publicly humiliate her. I didn't announce at a dinner party that I was leaving her for a real woman. I didn't post about it on social media with hashtags. I didn't bring my mistress to meet her family while we were still married. Grant isn't. Grant was at the dinner, Harold, sitting 2 tables over like some kind of poorly planned surprise party. She coordinated this. She planned it. She wanted maximum drama and minimum dignity. So forgive me if I'm not feeling particularly charitable about making sure her decision doesn't have consequences." He stood up slowly, like his legs weren't quite working right. "My employees, they have families." And there it was. The guilt card. The innocent bystander's card. The think of the children card, except with middle-aged people who had mortgages and dental insurance. "How many employees?" I asked. 37. "And how many of them knew about Marissa's affair before I did?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said. "You knew, didn't you? You knew she was seeing Grant. You knew she was planning to leave. And you didn't say anything because you thought I'd just roll over and take it. You thought I was too nice, too passive, too weak to fight back. I thought you loved her. I did love her. Past tense. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you and then asking for permission to be heard about it." Harold walked to the door like a man heading to his own execution. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. "She's still my daughter." "I know," I said. "And that's why you should probably have a conversation with her about the difference between courage and stupidity. Because what she did took guts. Just really, really dumb guts." He left without another word. I watched through the window as he got into his car. A nice car, probably financed through those business loans he was about to lose, and just sat there for a full 5 minutes with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then he drove away. I went back to the kitchen and made another grilled cheese. The first one had gotten cold during the drama, and cold grilled cheese is a tragedy nobody should endure. My phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. "Harold Mitchell visited you." "How did it go?" "How do you know he visited me?" "I have my ways." "Also, he called me from your driveway screaming about legal malpractice." "Is it malpractice if the law is working exactly as written?" That's what I told him. He hung up on me. "I'm having it bronzed." I smiled at my phone and took a bite of fresh, hot, perfectly melted grilled cheese. Life was good. Complicated, definitely. Messy, absolutely. But good. Really, really good. By Friday, the universe had apparently decided to put on a masterclass in cause and effect, and I had front row seats to the greatest show on earth. I'm talking chaos with a capital C, the kind of beautiful disaster you can't look away from even if you wanted to. And trust me, I absolutely did not want to. I started my morning the way any reasonable person would, with coffee that cost more per pound than most people's car payments and a spreadsheet Gerald had sent me titled Cascade Analysis. The man was documenting Marissa's self-destruction like it was a scientific experiment. There were columns. There were footnotes. There was even a graph showing the timeline of consequences, color-coded by severity. Red was financially catastrophic, orange was significantly problematic, and yellow was mildly inconvenient, but still funny. The spreadsheet was mostly red and orange. Very little yellow. Marissa had really committed to the bit. Let me walk you through the domino effect, because it was truly a thing of beauty. First domino, Marissa's scholarship fund. See, what most people don't know is that she'd been taking online classes for the past 2 years, working towards some kind of degree in interior design or lifestyle coaching, or something equally vague that rich people do when they want to feel productive without actually being productive. The tuition was covered by the Hollis Family Education Fund, which sounds generous until you realize it only covers people who are actually part of the Hollis family. Guess who wasn't part of the Hollis family anymore? Her university registrar sent her an email on Tuesday morning. I know because she forwarded it to me with about 47 exclamation points and several crying emojis, explaining that her account was past due for $37,000 and she needed to make payment arrangements immediately or her enrollment would be suspended. $37,000 for online classes that she'd been taking casually. I'd been paying for someone to casually accumulate debt while she was casually planning to leave me. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. Second domino, her father's business loans. Harold's Commercial Enterprises, which was a fancy name for a company that managed a few strip malls and some commercial properties that always seemed to need emergency repairs, had been running on credit for years. Good credit. The kind of credit you get when the Hollis Family Trust co-signs your loans and tells the bank that yes, this man is worth the risk. Turns out when you remove that co-signer, banks start asking uncomfortable questions like, can you actually afford this? And what's your real collateral? And why are your profit margins so terrible? By Wednesday, Harold's bank had called in 3 of his major loans for review. By Thursday, they'd frozen his line of credit. By Friday morning, he'd missed payroll for the first time in 30 years, and his employees were probably Googling how to file for unemployment. And is my boss going to jail? The best part? None of this was illegal or even particularly mean. The trust was simply exercising its right to withdraw as guarantor, which was completely within its legal authority. Harold had been flying on borrowed wings, and someone had just pointed out that gravity still existed. Third domino, her brother Tyler. Oh, Tyler. Sweet. Dumb Tyler, who had somehow managed to coast through life on the assumption that his last name and his brother-in-law's connections would always be enough. Tyler had landed a prestigious internship at Whitmore and Associates. Yes, the same law firm Gerald worked for, about 6 months ago. It was supposed to be his big break, his foot in the door, his chance to prove he was more than just Harold's underachieving son who'd failed the bar exam twice and spent most of his 20s finding himself in various Southeast Asian countries that coincidentally had very cheap beer. The internship had one tiny requirement. It was part of a program specifically for family members of the firm's major clients. The Hollis Family Trust was one of those major clients. Tyler was family adjacent through Marissa. Notice the past tense there? Gerald sent me a text on Thursday afternoon. Just had to tell Tyler Mitchell his internship is being terminated. He cried. Actual tears. In my office. I had to give him tissues. This is the best day of my professional life. I texted back. Did you at least wait until he was done crying before you escorted him out? I'm not a monster. I waited until he was mostly done. Like 85% done. You're going to hell. Already have my reservation. Got the executive suite. Fourth domino, the country club membership. This one was petty, I'll admit, but sometimes petty is exactly what the doctor ordered. Marissa loved that country club. She'd spent countless hours there playing tennis with women named Brittany and Skylar, drinking rose by the pool, and attending charity luncheons where they raised money for causes they couldn't quite remember, but definitely involved underprivileged something or others. The membership was in my name. Well, technically it was in the Hollis Family Trust's name, with me and my spouse as authorized users. Except Marissa wasn't my spouse anymore, and even if she was, she'd legally changed her name to Grant, which meant she was neither a Hollis nor married to a Hollis. The club's membership director, a woman named Patricia who took the rules more seriously than most people take the 10 Commandments, had sent Marissa a very polite letter explaining that her club access had been revoked and she needed to return her membership card and parking pass immediately. Marissa posted about it on Instagram, naturally. Wow. Can't believe some places are so petty they kick you out just for changing your name. Hashtag toxic behavior, hashtag moving on, hashtag real friends accept you. 17 people commented. 16 of them were her friends saying supportive things like, "You don't need them anyway," and their loss. The 17th was me. "Did you return the parking pass? Those things cost like $200 to replace." She deleted my comment immediately. But Patricia from the country club texted me. "Please thank Benjamin for reminding her about the parking pass. We were about to send it to collections." Fifth domino, the credit cards. Oh man, the credit cards. This was perhaps the most satisfying domino of all, because Marissa had been treating those cards like they were magical pieces of plastic that generated money through photosynthesis. There were 6 cards total, all linked to Hollis family accounts, all with limits that would make normal people dizzy. She'd been using them for everything. Groceries, clothes, that boutique where they sold candles that cost $80 and smelled like coastal grandmother energy, whatever the hell that meant. On Tuesday, all 6 cards were canceled. Not declined. Canceled. As in, cut up into tiny pieces by whatever algorithm manages these things. I found out about it through a very angry phone call on Wednesday morning. She'd been at Nordstrom, trying to buy shoes she absolutely did not need, when the card reader made that sad little beeping sound that means the party's over, honey. "Do you know how embarrassing that was?" She'd screamed into the phone. The cashier had to call her manager. There were people in line behind me. "Did you try using cash?" I'd asked innocently. The silence that followed was the sound of someone realizing they didn't actually have any cash because they'd been living on credit for so long they'd forgotten money could exist in physical form. Sixth domino, the car. Oh, the beautiful, perfect car situation. Marissa's Mercedes SUV, the one she'd nicknamed Lady because she was one of those people who named inanimate objects, had been a lease through one of the family accounts. A very generous lease that included insurance, maintenance, and unlimited miles because apparently that was a thing rich people negotiated for. The lease was terminated on Monday. The dealership sent a very polite tow truck on Tuesday morning while Marissa was inside Grant's apartment, probably planning their future or arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. She came outside to find her car gone and a note on the ground that said, "Vehicle retrieved per lease agreement termination. Personal belongings have been secured and can be collected at dealership during business hours." Grant's car was still there. The BMW she'd posed in front of for Instagram. Except it turned out that BMW was also a lease, and not a particularly good one. Grant was paying about twice what the car was worth because his credit score was apparently somewhere between questionable and should probably take the bus. When Marissa called me crying about the car, I said, "Well, at least you have Grant's BMW. It has a weird smell," she sobbed. "And the passenger seat doesn't recline. Sounds like a real man's car to me," I said and hung up before she could respond. By Friday afternoon, my phone was blowing up. Not from Marissa, surprisingly. She'd gone radio silent, which either meant she was plotting my murder or she'd finally run out of tears. Both seemed equally likely. No, the calls were from everyone else. Her friends, her family, even Grant, who left me a voicemail that was 40% swearing, 30% threats of legal action, and 30% the sound of Marissa crying in the background. I listened to the whole thing, saved it for posterity, and then blocked his number. Gerald called me around 4 p.m. "You should come into the office." "Why? Did something else happen?" "Harold's business declared bankruptcy this morning. Tyler is threatening to sue us for wrongful termination, which is hilarious because he was an at-will intern. And Marissa's mother just called asking if there's any way to work this out like adults." "What did you tell her?" "I told her adults read contracts before they sign them." She hung up on me. "You're having too much fun with this." "Benjamin, I've been a lawyer for 43 years. This is the most entertainment I've had since the Johnson Estate Battle of '03, and that involved a contested will and a parrot that could say you're not my real son." I drove to Gerald's office because honestly, what else was I going to do? Sit at home and feel guilty? That ship had sailed, crashed into an iceberg, and sunk with all hands on board. Gerald met me in the conference room with 2 glasses of scotch already poured. "To consequences," he said, raising his glass. "To people who earn them," I replied. We drank, and he showed me the rest of the cascade. The full analysis. Every single thing that had unraveled because Marissa decided the Hollis name wasn't good enough for her. It was comprehensive. It was thorough. It was absolutely devastating. And I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little bit. Because here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Some people need to learn that actions have consequences. Not because you're being cruel or vindictive or petty, but because that's how the world works. You can't just take, and then act surprised when the giving stops. Marissa had spent 12 years taking my name, taking my family's resources, taking the lifestyle and the status and the comfort. And then she decided it wasn't enough. She wanted more. She wanted different. She wanted a real man. Well, congratulations, Marissa. You got him. And everything that came with that choice. I left Gerald's office feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I was happy about the destruction, I'm not a sociopath, but because I was finally free. Free from the pretending, the pleasing, the constant effort to be enough for someone who would never think I was enough. That night, I ordered pizza, watched a movie Marissa would have hated, and went to bed early. The dominoes had fallen. The consequences had arrived. And somewhere in Grant's apartment with the weird-smelling car and non-reclining passenger seat, Marissa was probably realizing that fresh starts are expensive and hashtags don't pay the rent. The denial phase of grief is supposed to be temporary, a brief stop on the journey to acceptance. But Marissa and her family had apparently decided to set up permanent residence there, complete with furniture and a mortgage they couldn't afford. I found out about the family meeting through my cousin Rachel, who works at this overpriced brunch place downtown, where they serve eggs that cost $24 and come with a side of pretentiousness. She texted me Sunday morning. Your ex-wife and her family are at table 7 having what can only be described as a collective mental breakdown. Thought you should know. Also, they ordered the truffle omelet and their card got declined. I replied, which card? All of them. They're currently arguing about who has to Venmo who. It's beautiful. I drove down there because I'm only human, and humans are drawn to disaster like moths to a flame that's actively insulting them. I sat at the bar where I could see table 7, but they couldn't quite see me, ordered coffee that was definitely not worth $8, and watched the show. Marissa looked rough. Not rough for Instagram, where everything is strategically disheveled. Actually rough. Like she'd been crying for 3 days straight and had forgotten that concealer existed. Her hair was in a messy bun that wasn't the cute intentional kind, and she was wearing yoga pants and a hoodie, which for Marissa was basically the equivalent of showing up in a trash bag. Grant was there too, sitting next to her with his arm around her shoulders in that performative way guys do when they want everyone to know they're being supportive, but really they're just uncomfortable and don't know what else to do with their hands. Harold was at the head of the table, naturally, because even in crisis he needed to maintain his position as patriarch. Tyler was slouched in his chair looking like someone had canceled his Netflix subscription and told him he had to get a real job. And Marissa's mother, Susan, was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin that probably cost more than the tissue box at CVS. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but Rachel had accidentally seated herself at the table next to them to wipe down some already clean surfaces, and she was feeding me updates via text. The mom just said, "It's just a name. It shouldn't matter this much," Rachel texted. I nearly spit out my overpriced coffee. Harold is now explaining that names do matter, and she's saying that's old-fashioned thinking. Came the next text. This was better than anything Netflix had to offer. Grant apparently decided this was his moment to contribute to the conversation because I saw him lean forward with that expression men get when they think they're about to say something profound. Rachel's next text confirmed it. The boyfriend just said, in the modern world, we should be able to choose our own identities without financial consequences. I'm dying. I replied. Tell me someone is recording this. Better. The table behind them is live tweeting it. Hashtag just a name is trending locally. I pulled out my phone and checked Twitter. Sure enough, there it was. Someone with the handle at Brunch Drama had started a thread, currently witnessing a family having a breakdown over a name change at Sunday brunch. Thread incoming. Popcorn. The tweets were gold. Dad figure keeps saying, but the business, and mom figure keeps saying, it's just a name. Neither is listening to the other. Hashtag just a name. Daughter is crying into what I think used to be Eggs Benedict. Boyfriend looks like he wants to be literally anywhere else. Hashtag just a name. Someone just said, maybe if we explain it to Benjamin, and dad figure laughed. Like, actually laughed. Out loud. Hashtag just a name. Update. Their card got declined. Dad is now lecturing about financial responsibility while pulling out a different card. The irony is thick. Hashtag just a name. I was enjoying this way too much. I should probably have felt bad about it. I didn't. My phone rang. Gerald. I answered quietly, keeping my eye on table 7. Are you at the greenhouse? He asked. How do you? My wife is at the table behind the Mitchells. She's the one tweeting. She says Harold looks like he's about to have an aneurysm, and can we expedite his health insurance cancellation? Your wife is at brunch drama? Married her for her sense of humor. She's asking if you want her to go over and say hello. Absolutely not. This is perfect as is. Don't touch it. She says Marissa just told Grant that Ben will come around eventually because he's too nice to stay mad. I laughed. Actually laughed, right there at the bar. Too nice. She thinks I'm too nice. You were too nice, Gerald corrected. Past tense. Current you is delightfully vindictive. I approve. I watched as Susan reached across the table and took Marissa's hand in that maternal way that's supposed to be comforting. Rachel texted, Mom just said we'll fix this. It's America. Everything can be fixed with the right lawyer. I hate to break it to her. Tell her we have the right lawyer and he's on my side. I texted back. At table 7, Tyler finally seemed to be contributing to the conversation. He was gesturing wildly, apparently having found his voice now that he'd had time to process being fired from his internship. Rachel's next text made me choke on my coffee. The brother just suggested they sue for discrimination based on name change. He's very proud of this idea. Everyone else looks doubtful. Gerald, still on the phone, said, My wife says Tyler just proposed a discrimination lawsuit. Tell me he didn't. He did. That boy failed the bar exam twice and somehow thinks he understands civil rights law. The hubris is breathtaking. I watched as Harold apparently shot down Tyler's legal theory, based on the way Tyler deflated like a sad balloon. Grant was now saying something, looking very serious and important. Rachel texted, Boyfriend is explaining that society needs to evolve past archaic family structures. Direct quote. I'm putting it on my vision board. Grant's a philosopher now, I told Gerald. Grant's unemployed. My wife looked him up. He got laid off from his sales job 3 weeks ago and hasn't told Marissa yet. He's been going to Starbucks every morning and pretending to work. You're joking. I never joke about financial instability in my adversaries. It's too delicious. This was the gift that kept on giving. Marissa had left me for a real man who was currently faking having a job while lecturing about societal evolution over a brunch he couldn't afford. The check arrived at table 7. I watched Harold pull out another credit card. The server came back, shook his head. Harold tried a third card. Same result. Susan offered hers. Declined. Grant finally pulled out his wallet with this resigned expression like he knew what was coming. His card worked, but based on the way his jaw clenched, it had probably maxed out whatever remaining credit he had. Rachel texted, The boyfriend just paid. He looks like he's going to cry. This is the best shift I've ever worked. I'm naming my firstborn after you. I accept this honor, I texted back. The Mitchell family was standing up now, gathering their things, and I could see the exact moment when Susan spotted me at the bar. Her eyes went wide. She said something to Harold, who turned and looked directly at me. I raised my coffee cup in a friendly salute. Harold's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds, landing somewhere between fury and exhaustion. Susan looked like she wanted to come over and either hug me or slap me. I genuinely couldn't tell which. Marissa saw me last. Her face crumpled in this awful way that might have made me feel guilty if I hadn't spent the last hour watching her entire family rationalize away her mistakes like they were discussing a parking ticket instead of financial suicide. Grant put his arm around her and steered her toward the exit, shooting me a look that was probably supposed to be intimidating, but mostly just looked like indigestion. Tyler gave me the finger as he walked past. Very mature, really showcasing that advanced emotional intelligence. Harold stopped at the bar. Just stopped. Stood there looking at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. It's just a name, I said quietly, repeating what I'd heard through Rachel's intel network. That's what you all keep saying, right? It's just a name. Shouldn't matter this much. You're enjoying this, he said, and it wasn't a question. I'm enjoying my coffee, I corrected, which I can afford, using money from accounts that are in my name. The name I kept. Funny how that works. She's my daughter. And she was my wife. She chose to stop being my wife. She chose to stop being a Hollis. Those were her choices, Harold. Active, deliberate, publicly announced choices. I'm just letting her live with them. Susan appeared at Harold's elbow. Benjamin, please. Can't we talk about this? Like adults. Adults read the fine print before they sign documents, I said. Adults ask questions when they don't understand something. Adults don't announce life-changing decisions at dinner parties and then act surprised when those decisions have consequences. But surely there's some way. There isn't, I said, not unkindly. The trust provisions are clear. They're also permanent. Marissa can change her name back if she wants. She can marry Grant or leave Grant or join the circus. But she's not getting those benefits back. That door closed when she walked through it. Harold leaned in close. My employees are going to lose their jobs. Your employees worked for a business that was built on borrowed credibility. Maybe they should have worked for a business that was built on actual value. You're a bastard, Susan said, and there was venom in her voice. No, I corrected. I'm a Hollis. There's a difference, as your daughter recently discovered. They left. All of them. A sad parade of people who'd spent the last hour trying to convince themselves that reality was negotiable. Rachel came over and sat next to me at the bar. That was the most epic thing I've ever witnessed. You're my hero. I'm really not. You absolutely are. Do you know how many customers I deal with who treat service workers like garbage because they've never had to face consequences? Watching someone actually experience cause and effect is like witnessing a unicorn. Gerald's wife appeared on my other side. Martha Pemberton, she said, extending her hand. Professional gossip and amateur justice warrior. That was beautiful. I've already scheduled a follow-up thread for when they realize the unemployment benefits won't cover Grant's car payment. You researched his car payment? I research everything. It's a sickness. She grinned. Gerald's told me all about you. I'm glad someone finally activated Provision 9B. That clause has been sitting there for decades like Chekhov's gun, just waiting for someone to be stupid enough to trigger it. I didn't trigger it, I said. Marissa did. Exactly, Martha said. That's what makes it so perfect. She built her own prison and then locked herself inside while complaining about the architecture. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This isn't over. I showed it to Martha and Gerald, who had just arrived. Gerald took my phone, typed something, and handed it back. The message he'd sent read, "You're absolutely right. It's not over. It's permanent. Best wishes in your fresh start. Ben." Martha high-fived her husband. And I finished my overpriced coffee, left a generous tip for Rachel, and walked out of that brunch place feeling better than I had in 12 years. Because it wasn't just a name. It never was. And now everyone knew it. There's something deeply satisfying about official correspondence. Not email, not text messages. Actual letters, printed on high-quality paper with embossed letterhead, delivered by the United States Postal Service like humanity did back when we had patience and attention spans. Gerald called it the formalization of consequence. I called it the greatest hits album of Marissa's mistakes, professionally bound and delivered with tracking confirmation. The letters went out on Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, my phone had turned into a device that exclusively received rage and panic. I turned off notifications and just let it vibrate on my desk like a very angry and confused fish while I worked on absolutely nothing important. Rachel texted me around 2 p.m. Your ex-wife just came into the restaurant screaming about mail. We had to ask her to leave. She's sitting in her car in the parking lot. Well, Grant's car. You know what I mean. Is she crying? I texted back. Crying, yelling, possibly having a conversation with God. Hard to tell. Want me to bring her a water? You're too nice for this world, Rachel. I know. It's a burden. I knew what was in those letters. Gerald had shown me drafts last week, and I'd approved them with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for puppies or finding money in your coat pocket. There were 7 letters total, each one a masterpiece of legal precision and barely contained schadenfreude. Letter 1 went to Marissa's new address at Grant's apartment, a 2-bedroom in a complex that advertised luxury living, but really meant the appliances are from this decade, and there's a gym nobody uses. The envelope was thick, official, and impossible to ignore. Inside was a comprehensive list of every single benefit she'd lost, itemized with the kind of detail you'd expect from the IRS if the IRS actually cared about your feelings, which it doesn't. But Gerald apparently did in the most savage way possible. The letter started with a paragraph that was pure Gerald. Dear Ms. Grant, this correspondence serves to inform you of the status changes resulting from your voluntary disassociation from the Hollis family name, as executed on date, at restaurant name. in the presence of multiple witnesses and subsequently publicized via social media platforms. Translation: Hey, remember when you publicly dumped your husband? We do. We have receipts. Literal receipts from the restaurant. Then came the list. Oh, that beautiful, devastating list. Trust access, revoked ***. Effective immediately. All distributions, dividends, and discretionary allowances terminated. Estimated annual value, $127,000. I'd done the math with Gerald. Marissa had been receiving roughly 10 grand a month in various forms. Dividends from the family investments, allowances for household expenses, distributions from the trust that were labeled as family support, but really just meant money for being married to a Hollis. She'd never asked where it came from. She'd just spent it on organic groceries and yoga retreats, and that subscription service that sent her a new outfit every month that she'd wear once and then donate to charity to feel philanthropic. Estate privileges, revoked ***. All access to family properties terminated. This includes, but is not limited to, primary residence, vacation properties, and any facilities managed under Hollis Holdings LLC. The primary residence was the penthouse, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made visitors say things like, "Wow, and how much does this place cost?" The vacation properties included a beach house in the Outer Banks and a cabin in Colorado that Marissa had used exactly twice but liked knowing she had access to. Medical coverage, revoked ***. Family health insurance policy terminated. COBRA continuation rights information attached. This was the one that probably hurt most. The Hollis family health insurance was the kind of coverage where you could walk into any doctor's office, say, "I have a headache," and they'd give you an MRI just because they could. No copays, no deductibles, no fighting with insurance representatives named Chad who sounded like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. COBRA, the thing where you can keep your insurance if you pay the full premium yourself, was going to cost her about $800 a month, for a plan significantly worse than what she'd had. Education grants, revoked ***. All tuition assistance and educational funding terminated. Outstanding balances are the sole responsibility of the grant recipient. That $37,000 she owed the university? All hers now. Every penny. The letter even helpfully included the registrar's contact information in case she needed to set up a payment plan. Credit facility access, revoked ***. All authorized user privileges terminated across all family accounts. No more cards. No more emergencies that somehow always involved shoes or handbags or that boutique where they sold scarves that cost more than most people's rent. Club memberships, revoked ***. Country club, athletic club, and all associated recreational facilities. No more tennis with Brittany and Skylar. No more rows by the pool. No more charity luncheons where they pretended to care about literacy while drinking wine that cost more per bottle than the books they were supposedly supporting. Legal representation, terminated ***. The firm of Whitmore and Associates will no longer provide legal counsel or representation. This meant if Marissa wanted to fight any of this, which she couldn't, but she might try, she'd need to hire her own lawyer. With money she didn't have. To fight a case she couldn't win. Against Gerald, who'd been doing this for 43 years and collected difficult cases like some people collected stamps. The letter ended with a paragraph that I'd personally written and Gerald had polished to legal perfection. These actions are not punitive in nature, but rather represent the automatic implementation of trust provisions designed to protect family assets and maintain the integrity of the Hollis legacy. You exercised your right to change your legal name and disassociate from the family. The trust has exercised its corresponding provisions. We wish you well in your fresh start with Mr. Grant and trust that your real man will provide the support these revoked benefits previously supplied. I'd wanted to add, good luck, you're going to need it. But Gerald said that crossed the line from professionally savage to potentially actionable. He wasn't wrong, but it would have been satisfying. Letter 2 went to Harold at his business address. It was shorter, but somehow more devastating. It basically said, your loans are being called. Your credit facility is being terminated. Your net 90 terms are now net 15. Have a nice day. Gerald had added a helpful paragraph suggesting Harold consult with bankruptcy attorneys and included a list of 3 firms he recommended. The fact that all three firms were competitors of Whitmore and Associates was just Gerald's way of adding insult to injury. Letter 3 went to Tyler at his apartment, which he apparently shared with two roommates who worked in tech and played video games until 3 a.m. The letter explained that his internship termination was permanent, included documentation of every mistake he'd made during his brief tenure. Gerald kept notes on everything, and suggested he consider alternative career paths that don't require bar admission. I'd asked Gerald if that last part was necessary. He'd said, "The boy told me lawyers were basically just professional arguerizers who made up complicated words to seem smart." This is me being nice. Letters 4 through 7 went to various institutions: banks, the university, the country club, and the dealership where Marissa's car had been leased, confirming the changes and providing documentation. Gerald called these the paper trail of ruin. By Tuesday morning, Marissa had apparently received and read her letter because my phone had 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and a series of text messages that started with "We need to talk" and devolved into a caps lock situation that suggested she was either very angry or had forgotten where the caps lock button was and couldn't figure out how to turn it off. I listened to exactly one voicemail. It was 3 minutes of her crying, yelling about how this wasn't fair, demanding I fix this immediately, and then more crying. Somewhere in the background, I could hear Grant saying, "Just hang up, baby, he's not worth it," which was rich coming from a guy who was currently being supported by a woman who could no longer support herself. I deleted all the voicemails without listening to the rest and sent one text. Everything in that letter is legally binding and permanent. I suggest you focus on your fresh start. P.S. The part about me being too nice to stay mad aged poorly. Regards, Ben. Wednesday brought my favorite response. A letter arrived at my house. My house, the one Marissa no longer had keys to, written on notebook paper in her handwriting. Actual notebook paper, like we were in middle school passing notes in homeroom. The letter was 6 pages long and covered everything from "You're being unreasonable" to "What about the good times we had" to "Grant says you're probably just jealous." There was even a paragraph where she offered to work things out if I'd just call off the lawyers and restore the benefits. She signed it Marissa with a heart over the I like she used to do when we were dating. No last name, just Marissa. I showed it to Gerald over lunch at a steakhouse where the cheapest item on the menu was $40 and worth every penny. "She wants to negotiate," he said, reading through it while cutting into a ribeye that was cooked to absolute perfection. "There's nothing to negotiate. I know that. You know that. She apparently doesn't know that." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and said, "Want me to respond?" "Officially, is there any other way?" I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes, but keep it short." Gerald pulled out his phone, typed something, and showed me the screen. "Ms. Grant, Mr. Hollis has asked me to respond on his behalf. The provisions outlined in our previous correspondence are non-negotiable and permanent. Per the trust documentation you should have read before changing your name, there is no appeals process, no grace period, and no mechanism for restoration of benefits. We recommend you direct your energy toward your new life with Mr. Grant rather than attempting to renegotiate consequences of choices you made freely and publicly. Regards, Gerald Pemberton, Senior Partner, Whitmore and Associates." "It's beautiful," I said. "I know." He sent it from his official firm email, probably while she was checking her phone for the 1,000th time hoping I'd changed my mind. Thursday was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before something either explodes or dies completely. Friday afternoon, I got a text from Rachel. "Your ex-wife is back at the restaurant. She's with her mom. They're both crying into salads. Thought you should know." I didn't go watch this time. I'd seen enough. The letters had done their job. The consequences were real, documented, and impossible to ignore. That night, I poured myself a glass of that expensive bourbon, sat on my balcony overlooking the city, and raised my glass to absolutely no one. "To real men," I said quietly. "The kind who read contracts, respect legacy, and understand that some things, like family names, actually matter." Somewhere across the city, Marissa was probably Googling how to undo a legal name change quickly, while Grant was probably Googling how to afford a girlfriend who's suddenly expensive. And I was sitting on my balcony, drinking bourbon I could afford, in a home I owned outright, with a last name that meant something. The letters had been sent. The message was delivered. And the only person who could have prevented all of this was the same person who'd signed her name to the divorce papers with a heart over the I. Consequences, it turns out, don't care about your feelings. They just care about your signature. The quarterly Hollis family board dinner was the kind of event where people wore their actual good jewelry and remembered which fork to use for what course. It was held at the family estate, my Uncle Richard's place, which looked like someone had taken a European castle and given it a moderate American makeover. Harold showed up early. Bold move for someone who technically wasn't invited anymore. He was waiting by the entrance when I arrived, looking like he'd aged about 15 years in 3 weeks. His suit was wrinkled, which for Harold was basically the equivalent of showing up naked. "Benjamin, please," he started, but I just walked past him toward the door. My Uncle Richard, the family chairman and the guy who made Gerald look warm and fuzzy, was standing in the foyer. He looked at Harold the way a cat looks at a bird it's about to eat. "Harold," Uncle Richard said, not unkindly but not warmly either. "This meeting's for name holders only." "But Marissa," Harold tried. "Chose to be a grant." Uncle Richard finished smoothly. "Grants aren't on this ledger." 3 weeks after the board dinner, I was at the downtown shelter where I volunteered every Thursday morning. It wasn't some rich guy guilt thing. I'd been doing it since college, way before Marissa, way before any of this drama. Folding blankets, sorting donations, occasionally helping someone fill out paperwork for housing assistance. Simple work that actually mattered. I was folding my 47th blanket when I heard heels clicking on the concrete floor. Expensive heels. The kind that echo in a way that announces, "I don't belong here, but I'm trying really hard to look humble." Marissa. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, or at least way less than usual. She was wearing jeans and a plain sweater, both of which I recognized from 3 years ago because apparently buying new clothes required money she didn't have anymore. "Ben," she said, and her voice cracked on just my name. I kept folding. "Marissa, can we talk?" "We are talking. Please." She stepped closer. Her mascara was smudged. She'd been crying. Again. I didn't know it would go this far. I set down the blanket and looked at her. Really looked at her. "You thought you were upgrading, didn't you? Thought you were trading in an old model for something newer, shinier, better." "I just wanted to feel chosen," I finished. "I know. You said that at dinner. Right before you chose to publicly humiliate me and legally destroy your own financial stability." "Grant and I broke up," she said quietly. "Of course they did. When? Last week. Turns out his consulting business was unemployment and lies. He couldn't afford me." His words, not mine. I almost laughed. "Almost. So now you're here. Looking for what exactly? Forgiveness? Money? A time machine?" "I just wanted to feel like someone chose me, Ben. Like I mattered to someone." "I chose you," I said, and my voice was harder than I intended. 17 years ago, with a mortgage, a minivan, and joint tax returns. I chose you every single day for 12 years. You just didn't think that counted because it wasn't exciting enough for Instagram." She wiped her eyes. "Can I come back?" I picked up another blanket. Started folding. "Sure. As soon as my last name does." Silence. The kind that feels like acceptance finally arriving way too late. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you are. Sorry doesn't pay rent, though." She stood there for another minute, maybe hoping I'd change my mind, maybe just trying to figure out what to say. Finally, she turned and walked away, those expensive heels clicking against concrete until the sound faded completely. I finished folding the blanket. Some choices you can undo. Some you can't. And some people have to learn the difference the hard way. The Hollis Foundation dinner came 2 months later. It was the kind of event where people donated money they'd never miss to causes they'd probably forget about by Tuesday. But at least the champagne was good and the tax deductions were better. This year's invitations had a new line printed at the bottom. Attendance restricted to verified Hollis name holders and their guests. Uncle Richard's idea. Gerald approved it. I just smiled when I saw it. The ballroom was elegant. Velvet curtains, classical quartet, centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's car payments. I gave a short speech about legacy and responsibility, the kind of thing my grandfather would have said if he'd been better at public speaking and worse at day drinking. "Some people think legacy is money," I said, looking out at the room full of relatives who actually understood what our name meant. "It's not. Legacy is the name attached to it. The reputation. The responsibility. And if you don't respect that name, someone else will inherit your seat. Polite applause. A few nods from the older generation who remembered when names actually meant something. After the speech, I stepped outside for air. That's when I saw her. Marissa was standing at the gate, looking through the iron bars like a kid outside a toy store. She wasn't trying to get in, just watching. Her hair was different, shorter, cheaper cut. Her coat was from Target, not that boutique she used to love. Inside, the orchestra started playing, for he's a jolly good fellow. Uncle Richard's tradition whenever someone successfully protected the family legacy. I raised my glass toward the window where Marissa could see me. To real men, I said quietly, though she couldn't hear me. Inside, the entire room raised their glasses in response. Marissa turned and walked away, disappearing into the November cold. And I went back inside, where it was warm, where my name meant something, where consequences had finally finished teaching their lesson. Some names you earn, some names you inherit, and some names you lose because you thought hashtags mattered more than history.